What are the biggest secrets of theme parks? At the park I worked for, the games were easier to win earlier in the day so that people would carry around the giant prizes and entice other people to play. Don't ever go in the ball pits. Little kids track all sorts of food and grime into the pit and regularly go number one in there since they confuse it for a pool. The balls are only cleaned once a week, and that generally means just putting them in a net bag and hosing them off. You just keep spraying until the water stops coming off brown. They're then air-dried and not sanitized in any way. Former Six Flags employee here, my park is the safest in the country because we call the rides down for rain, for people hurling, and for lost items. They could just be obstructing the track. So if a ride is down, it's probably not for a mechanical reason. We even pulled an emergency stop while I was being trained on one roller coaster because a military official lost his ID and was threatening my boss if we didn't go get it for him. If people knew how small that issue was, they'd be furious that we stopped the ride. I could individually control the speed of your go-kart, so if you were a jerk to me, you were going to lose every race you were in. All I had to do was press the button corresponding to the kart, and then would press a number that would set the max speed. It was in miles per hour if I recall correctly. Pretty sure there was also an all karts button to set the speed and stop of all of the karts at once. My friend in high school used to work at Hershey Park, and one day we went together. When we ordered lunch, I was just planning on asking for a cup of water with my meal so I didn't have to pay an extra $5. My friend told me to ask the cashier for a cup of magic water instead of just a cup of water. I trusted this friend, so I did what she said. When I received my cup of magic water, I took a sip, and to my surprise it was Sprite. So I got a free cup of Sprite with my meal that day. Worked a churro cart next to a large pond in the park. At night it was impossible to keep the bugs out of the cinnamon and sugar bin. That's some extra protein right there. But yeah, that seems like the sort of thing you pay the health inspector to look the other way for. About 8 years ago, I managed a whitewater rafting ride, the big donut tubes that can sit 6 people, as a side job while in college. One day, the water filter broke down. The managers kept the ride running for over 2 weeks anyway. The water smelled so bad and turned dark green/brown. The inside of the rafts smelled like an old porta potty. We were instructed to tell guests the water filter was broken, but the water was clean, which I'm pretty sure was a lie. Thankfully, being a shift leader, I didn't need to go anywhere near the water, but I did feel bad for my employees and the guests who rode, despite looking obviously disgusted by the smell. A lot of scary, dangerous rides are operated by stupid teenagers. My source? I was a stupid 16-year-old learning to operate rides at Six Flags. Yikes. Don't they count as heavy machinery? Are OSHA regulations state by state or nationwide? Because where I live, you have to be 18 to legally operate heavy machinery. Anyone under 18 couldn't operate the photo printers at my last job because of it. I'm fairly sure they're not considered heavy machinery, which is screwed up, but that sums things up nicely. Throw up with no visible blood is either cleaned up with a sawdust-like material to soak up the liquid and then swept into a dustbin, or just hosed off with a garden hose. The coaster seat or table is usually not sanitized or anything, so you're sitting in dried chuck-up particles. That sawdust material was used way back when I was in grade school, and yep, it's used for everything. I don't expect more than a hose for chuck-up on rides. It's probably not dangerous if you're properly clothed, like not super short shorts and a top that covers your back. Many rides require this anyways these days. But if it was damp and milky particles, I'd be worried. I'd just be wary of wet ride seats unless it was raining. My place used to say that any change or cash lost on a ride was donated to charity. If they meant the charity of their employees' pockets, then they weren't lying. Quarters were the good ones to find since it was rarely bills. I worked at Dollywood when I was 18. Most ride operators are minimally trained. I even accidentally pressed the harness release, panicked and started the roller coaster. You should have seen people's faces as the train started rolling and harnesses popped open. Also, the software running the ride was Windows 95. This was in 2006 or 7 on a ride built in 2004. I'll add another secondary story about that coaster. This was the Tennessee Tornado, which had harnesses shaped like a U that went down over your head and across your chest into your lap. One day we had a rather large man, probably nearing 450 to 500 pounds, wearing a bright orange shirt. He somehow manages to actually get into the seat at the very front of the train, and as we're checking harnesses, this guy goes down exactly 1 click. Everyone knows that ratcheting sound from amusement ride restraints, dozens of clicks on the way down, and this man's went 1. It wasn't even across his chest, it was a few degrees short of being perfectly horizontal across his body. The only thing keeping this man from dying was 1 click of a ratchet. I've ridden this coaster by myself in the morning for pre-operation check. G-force essentially holds you in the seat by itself. My 160-pound, 18-year-old body would never leave the seat during any of the loops. I don't know if gravity would have held this man in the seat had that 1 click failed. I just remember the 3 of us dock workers standing at the rear of the deck watching this glowing orange 6XL t-shirt look like a pumpkin strapped to a missile go around 3 quivering loops before coming back safely to the station. My aunt and uncle work for Disney World. Apparently when someone chucks up on a ride, it's called a protein spill. Ex-Disney cast member here, we call it a Code V. Also, if you ever hear a cast member yell 105 to another cast member, that means he or she thinks a nearby park guest is hot and the cast member is alerting nearby coworkers to see. We used to crank up the amount of salt in the fries and then build a soda stall next to it. Next, we'd remove some of the paths to trap guests in the salty fries and expensive soda area. We made a killing. Most theme parks avoid paying overtime because they're considered seasonal. Therefore, they understaff and get employees to work 60-hour weeks, usually at less than stellar pay rates. That's completely legal though. As far as shady crap, the instances are few and far between but because parks are cash cows and no one wants to mess that up. At the water park I worked at, the pools had their pH levels checked constantly. 2 people's jobs was to walk around all day and continuously check the levels. The food is crap at these places, but that's not a dirty little secret. I worked at the Fudgery in Six Flags. It's technically a part of retail, so none of the employees have any food safety training, which means the back is never cleaned properly. It had mold, and kids don't get new gloves after handling disgusting, sweaty money. Worked at Cedar Point for a summer on disaster transport. May she rest in peace. Despite being an indoor ride, it would have to go down anytime there was a significant amount of rain because the roof leaked. Supposedly because the fireworks they set off from the beach would burn holes in it, but I don't know how true that actually is. This is especially significant for disaster transport because it didn't run on a track like most coasters. It ran freely in a bobsled-like trough. So the ride itself would actually be affected by the weight distribution in a given train. It would also fishtail around corners really badly if the troughs were wet. So every time it rained, we'd send one of us to ride every couple cycles to feel whether or not it was fishtailing yet, because there was no other way to know without shutting the whole ride down to walk the troughs. If we could tell that it was fishtailing, the ride would go down for mechanical reasons. We'd wait until the rain let up, then start running empty trains through to assist with drying everything up, with one of us going through occasionally until we could tell that the fishtailing had stopped. The real secret is that the ride was 100 times more fun when it was fishtailing because it was less predictable. Another case of the ride being a little unsafe making it more fun, there was a brief period of time where someone with an employee badge asked for an air hawk from the ride operators on the Skyhawk. They'd intentionally not pushed the harnesses all the way down. Definitely not enough that you were going to fall through, but enough to get some absolutely sick airtime while the ride was going. To this day, I still try to position myself in the seat in a way that the harness will be a couple of clicks short of where it's supposed to be because it's so frickin' fun. Well, the narrator expected all the stories of gross hygiene breaches and horrible working conditions for the poor teens. He didn't expect that the staff in these places were just constantly testing to see if the rides were below the accepted level of deadliness. Absolutely wild. I used to be in management for a small family-owned park in Utah. They hire lots of 14 and 15-year-olds because they own a few cattle, and I'm not exactly sure how this works, but I think technically they're considered farmhands, which allows them to work at a younger age than the usual 16. Since this place is one of the only employers in Utah to do this, they hire tons of young'uns. Disney has an underground tunnel system for workers in different areas of the park to move around so that you don't see people dressed up from any other area out of their place. Also, there's a color Disney uses in their parks that's the least detectable shade of green so that trash cans and stuff are basically hidden in plain sight. The colors are called Go Away Green and Blend in Blue, and they can be seen almost everywhere in the park. Also, Disney World was built on elevated land because Florida is one giant bog, and their underground system simply wouldn't be possible below ground. Former ride op who worked on multiple major level parks here, how often the ride crew members are hungover and possibly still drunk is a massive concern. You work with the same people day in and day out. You become family. Especially at the age when you don't have much responsibility other than putting gas in the car, all you're doing is partying. The park closes at 10 p.m., and by 11 p.m. you're shotgunning beers in your manager's backyard, while the new kid is doing backflips off the roof of the house into the pool. This goes on until 4 or 5 a.m., and all you have to do is be at work at 9:30. Good times. Also, the inter-park relationships. MTV should really do a reality show on working at an amusement park. The amounts of drama is crazy. Ex-employee of Phantasialand, Germany. The African immigrant workers were all sent to work on the Black Mamba ride. It's kind of embarrassing. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Every morning the wave pool is crystal clear. When it's not, it's because of wee-wee, sunblock, dirt, etc. Everyone knows they're full of these things, but I don't think people realize how clean the water is when it starts off in the morning. I worked at Worlds of Fun. I passed all ride operating tests without actually being at the ride itself or ever seeing the panel. Since I passed the tests, I could then operate any of the rides at any point during the season, even though I realistically had never seen any of them before. It's been a while since I worked at Disney. Here's what I can remember. Code words. 101, ride down, and 102, the ride's back up. Those are the official ones. The unofficial ones? Well, there was 105 for an attractive guest, 737 is a fat guest, and 747 is a fat guest on an ECV. We spread Vauban on the throw-up. As others have described, it's a sawdust-like material with an incredibly distinctive smell. And we do indeed hate you. That one clever thing you do to try and get a rise out of us? Yeah, we've seen that a million times before. Being nice is a great way to get us to treat you well. Nice people get to ride again if I'm feeling generous. People who try to insist to ride again stop the ride for everyone else. We had a little book which had the ability to rectify situations. You dropped your soda? We'll get you another one. Weren't supposed to, but we did give them out for magical moments. We could give you a fast pass for any ride in the park and for free food. At the end of the night, we walk the track and locate items lost. Some of the unsavory employees, cast members, would find items and take them. One guy I knew sold the stuff on eBay all the time. And yes, we can get you into the park for free. No, we're not going to. Some people sell their passes. You can be termed for it. Didn't stop them. When you work the hotels there, we give back ridiculous amounts of money for stupid inconveniences. In addition, if someone is really nice or celebrating something, we can deliver free stuff to the room. Once spent $300 on someone because they were incredibly kind and celebrating a milestone anniversary. And if you complain enough, Disney will cater to you. My ex's mum never made reservations for anything. She'd just go and insist she had a reservation, argue shamelessly for 15 to 20 minutes, and eventually we'd be seated. It was always awkward. I didn't work at Disney during the time. I did it for Cinderella's Royal Table, the steakhouse in Canada, Epcot, Crystal Palaces, literally any restaurant. We know you're full of crap, we've heard everything. At the end of the day, it's a job, and most, aside from college program kids who actually think the experience is going to mean something in their lives, don't give a crap about you, how much you've saved for years, among the other usual excuses. We're doing a minimum wage job and we don't get paid enough to deal with your crap. Listen for context. Have a magical day is frequently used as go F yourself. How gross the food is. Overpriced and frozen, dropped on the floor and picked up with unwashed hands. I worked in the in-park subway and my manager made me wash off the moldy tomatoes to serve to customers because she forgot to order fresh food. Subway. Eat mold. We're officially out of bought license plates. Kids go number 2 in the wave pool constantly. All we do is clear it out for 10 minutes and then let people back in. You should never mess with ride ops. Safety is always number 1, and I will kick you out of the park if you're threatening someone's safety, including your own. Listen to all the instructions given, even if you don't agree, because it's there to prevent you from being hurt. Yet another tip from the Basic Human Decency Handbook that still so many people will completely disregard. Give the poor teens a break. They're just trying to get through the day. Not lurid, but just behind the scenes from a different angle. I worked as an acrobat in a show at a park one summer, and it was amazing. I got paid $125 a day, so as a 19-year-old like a decade ago who had been waiting tables for 12 to 13-hour shifts during the summer before, it felt like I was an actual rock star or something. I had money for my monthly rent in less than a week each month, and money to spare that I could blow on clubbing and stuff. I had 3 half-hour shows a day, with 2 3-hour breaks between shows. During the breaks, I could go ride rides because as a contracted employee through the production company, I wasn't technically a direct employee of the park. It was a medium-sized park that I'd thought was large when I was a high schooler, but I got tired of the rides in like 3 or 4 days. Then I wandered the water park and found the lazy river, and realized I could just ride the lazy river all day and tan and get paid for it. Later, even that got boring to do all day, so I'd just spend my time between shows getting better at my acro that I was performing in the show. But I didn't want to get hurt pushing too hard on the job since there was no workers' comp, so I ended up learning to play guitar and sing at the top of scaffolding on the set, like 25 feet up with a cool breeze and audio privacy just from the sheer amount of park noise around me. I'd do it again if I had the chance, but I'm not really good enough anymore and I have to be a grown-up. It was probably the best 4 months of my life in some ways. I think the only behind-the-scenes thing that I think everyone would be interested in is just, like, I was allowed to walk everywhere in the park. I had an ID badge that someone could theoretically check, but my costume for the show was streetwear anyway, and no one ever really checked who I was or asked why I was there at any point of the summer. All summer I just walked around exploring the minutiae of the park with impunity, and 80% of the time I could have been a random park goer and no one checked me. It really is amazing how deep you go into places just by acting confident without anyone asking if you should be there. I worked at Disney World and at Universal. I wish I had dirt to share, but both companies were on the up and treated guests with care and provided workers safe environments in which to do their jobs. What I can share for those interested: managers get paid very little but stay on for love of the job. And people in charge of rides instantly hate anyone who stands up when they're clearly not supposed to. You ruin our days by doing so, idiots. Former park ops at a Florida theme park here. My job was to do custodial work in the bathroom and pathways, like sweep, take out the trash, hose. I had a designated section while occasionally getting assigned theater duty. That $15 meal that you just paid for in the restaurant? Yeah, the employees can get all of that for $2 or $3 depending on the items. Theme park food is way overpriced for guests. If you complain enough, you will get what you want. When the theater hits capacity, I can't let anyone in. You can give me a sob story about how you traveled all the way from Antarctica for all I care. The second that you mention wanting to talk to a supervisor, I have to get them. 9 times out of 10, my supervisor will let you through the show no problem, just to keep you happy. I, on the other hand, will be slightly annoyed, but that's how things work in theme parks. There are plainclothes security officers walking around the whole entire park. You probably don't even notice. So please, think twice before doing anything stupid like doing the deed on the Sky Ride. There's quite a few even ignoring the markups, like even if they give a prize every time you played a dumb game, the park would still win. So let's see. Many of the people you would actually hope are mature adults and aren't drunk or on something, well, they're 16-year-old green herb users. They also live a very exciting life that makes annoying sitcoms seem reasonable. Guess who Jenny from X Roller Coaster was doing the deed with behind the fry stand? I assure you I don't care, but you'll tell me anyway. Many of those people are massively overworked, and I don't mean like, oh, he did a few hours overtime and hit 45 hours, I mean a 60 to 80 plus hour week for a month straight. We don't get paid overtime. We can work anywhere from 12 to 16 hours a day, and there's a special exception in the US Labor Code that says that theme park employees don't need to be paid overtime if they're a seasonal employee. And it just so happens that theme parks mostly hire seasonal employees. Chew on that for your next visit to a theme park north of the Mason-Dixon line. Beyond that, here's a tip. If it's a seasonal park and they're looking to hire, for the love of God, do not apply at the start of the season. They'll tell you that there are more benefits, but if that's at the start of a season, they're understaffed, which means you work double shifts. An employee in the park collapsed in early May after being on his feet for over 10 hours straight. A guy at a chicken tendies restaurant in the theme park was a farmer hick. He liked to do stupid pranks. Turnover was so high, a manager was 16 years old. Basically, kids run the parks. Anyway, Hick wanted to fry his boot in the deep fryer to see what would happen. Boot was caked in cow crap. He dropped it in. At this time, a customer was whining about not getting his french fries, said, "I didn't pay $47 to come into this park and stand in line all day." This was about 17 years ago now. Anyway, the hick farmer was getting annoyed with trying to tong his boot out of the fryer, then gets annoyed at the customer as well and puts the fries down. Fry basket right over the crap-caked boot. Cooked until golden brown and served up to the customer. That was my first day working at the park and my last day in food services. Forever. To this day, if I'm ever dragged to the park for whatever reason, I always avoid that chicken restaurant. I worked for an amusement park in Ohio for 2 summers, and the worst things I've seen are for the foods department. I personally watched a dozen french fries for one of the food stands fall off a pallet and get semi-crushed by the forklift tire, then get thrown back into the pallet to be served. They also had their entire food warehouse get closed down for a better part of the summer because of a bird infestation. The company salvaged what they could and threw it into refrigerated trailers to be served from. The summers I worked there were great, exhausting, and probably borderline illegal for the open-close shifts they had people working, going from 7 or 8 a.m. to maybe 12 a.m. or later. I wouldn't give up the friends I made there, but it could definitely have been better. Disney cast member here. We hate guests, we hate our job. The end. We're supposed to say, have a magical day, but it pretty much just means F you when dealing with rude people.
People who separated or got divorced within 1 year of getting married, when did you know it was a mistake? Not me, but my dad. He got remarried after being divorced for about 5 years. I would have been all for it, but he met this woman in another state on a business trip and would travel up to see her every weekend after they hit it off. They knew each other for 6 months before getting engaged. The engagement was only for 3 months. My brother and I tried telling him about all the red flags, telling him to take his time. My dad is very well off financially, and we kept trying to teach him things were moving too quickly, that she was only in it for the money. She moved her whole family from their hometown to the city my dad lived in, including their elderly grandmother who needed constant medical supervision. Before they were even married, the pantry was full of Whole Foods brand food instead of the local grocery store, as was tradition. We had all new furniture, and the house had to be repainted, all at his bride-to-be's request. The marriage lasted all of 2 weeks. Apparently my dad's bride had the gall to ask my dad to leave everything to her in the will, and write me and my brother out. Only then did he realize she was in it for the money. The next day, he had the marriage annulled. Someday, I'd like to know what it's like to fall so completely for someone that I don't recognize they're taking advantage of me. Must feel good for that instant before it all comes crashing down. When he choked me against a wall at a party, he was mad that I laughed at another guy's joke. People were passing by us, but just kind of looked and kept going. Lots of other stuff happened too, but it took me a while to wake up and break away. I was in denial for too long. Back in the early 1980s, I spent 6 years in the US Navy. In 1986, I was recruited to go into the US Army through a program for technical and intelligence-experienced military personnel to become warrant officers. All the Navy offered me was sea duty and more sea duty. It looked like a real good deal. I was engaged to a young lady 3 years my junior and had a bit more than $20,000 in savings. Everything looked promising with a new career and family life. The wedding went off without a hitch. I was looking at a vacation of about 3 months between exiting the Navy and entering training for the Army. It was when my recruiter contacted me over my security clearance that things went south. My credit report did not match my questionnaire. There was 3 credit cards with a $14,000 balance I didn't mention. It was no big deal, they weren't delinquent, but I needed to amend my answers to account for them. Turns out my wife had opened up a charge card at our bank, then got a couple of store cards around town. She had purchased some serious clothes and jewelry, but the real kicker? She had bought a horse. She had taken lessons as a child and decided this was going to be her new thing. There was the price of the animal, riding gear, saddle and tack, vet bills, stable fees, yada yada yada. I ended up dumping a big chunk of my savings into paying down these cards, then amending my questionnaire responses. She was from a very blue-collar family. They were very good people who worked hard for everything they had. But I don't think credit ratings and compound interest rates were much discussed at the dinner table. So I explained about credit cards, the huge interest rate, how long it would take me to pay one down, then about security clearances, and having a huge debt with no job would affect it. I treated all of this as a bump in our relationship, but things got dark real fast. My ship date was coming up, and things had to be done before I started training. I was in good physical shape, but I was facing boot camp, AIT, airborne school, ranger school, warrant officer selection, and advanced training. Basically 18 months of utter insanity. I was prepared for what I faced, but there was a lot that could go wrong. If I got through it, I was a warrant officer. But if I dropped the ball along the way, I would not only be enlisted, but junior enlisted in a job they would decide for me. In theory, I could end up a line cook in some chow hall at Camp Nowhere. About a week later, the phone rings. It's about the horse. No one was taking care of the animal or cleaning the stable or even feeding the poor thing. The stable had covered down for the sake of the animal, but we're now charging $350 a week for the extra services my wife was supposed to be doing. She was leaving our apartment every day, and I assumed it was for riding in care of the animal. And for the first week, she was. The second week, she was lawyer shopping. She wanted out. She must have gotten wind of what happened at the stable and didn't come home that night. The next day, I got served with papers. Total marriage time, 47 days. So I ended up with an apartment with 4 months on the lease, no car, and a horse. I found a new home for the horse. I had to defer my ship date and it took 14 months to settle the divorce. My security clearance was approved 2 days after the papers were filed. I shipped the next day. In the end, I had 2 pair of pants, 3 shirts, and a pair of shoes that had no business on anyone's feet. I was working 2 minimum wage jobs, 14 hours a day, paying down debt, lawyer's fees, rent, and sometimes eating to get by. I ended up at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, mowing lawns for 2 months as I shipped without a training slot for boot camp. I wasn't happy, but I was relieved. In airborne school, I met a cadet who was going to airborne school for her summer break. She had a year to go before her commission, and we hit it off. We'd get together on holidays, between training and long weekends. When I finished training and got my warrant, still a cadet, she flew across the country to give me my first salute. I gave her a silver dollar as per tradition. 2 months later, she received her commission, to which I saluted her and returned the silver dollar. Married that Christmas. We've been together for 31 years. Well, as horrible as it went the first time around, I'm glad you were able to find someone that worked with you. I knew a week after I got married when he slammed my head into the wall because he saw me looking at a man at an ice cream shop. I'm from the US and got married in England. This dude completely changed right after we got married. A couple of weeks later, I had to get out of there and come back to the US. I don't understand why this is such a thing, how you hear about people all of a sudden changing drastically after getting married. In this case, the guy got violent. Like, were you just holding it all in for a couple of years while you were dating and you think, now we're married so I can just let it all out? That's not how that works. You still have to continue to be a good person while you're married too. She nearly killed me because she thought I was cheating from some text that I sent to my mother. I was blindsided by it. We had lived together for a year, about an hour from my hometown. We relocated upon her request and desire to my hometown prior to our marriage, so that when we had kids, it's best to be close to family. We had a house we loved, a dog we loved, jobs we both loved working in. Or so I thought. Married in October. She goes to visit her sister over the next Labor Day weekend, and I can't attend due to work. Comes back the Tuesday after Labor Day and tells me she's living a lie and someone else's dream, and that she needs a divorce. I had no idea. The divorce was finalized in January. She married some dude that her sister was friends with, that she had met on that trip I was unable to attend. The following September. Life is wild sometimes. This one feels really bad because you were just completely blindsided by this. Sounds like this girl really doesn't know what she wants and is still kind of figuring it out. I'm sorry you had to go through that. On the honeymoon. We dated for 5 years, but on the honeymoon, we had a big argument over my liberal use of sunscreen. She refused to wear any because of chemicals, and I liberally use it due to my ginger skin. We seriously argued over this for a good hour, and she refused to even go into the pool with me because of the sunscreen chemicals. After a scuba adventure with her, she could barely walk because she got so burnt on her legs, whereas my skin didn't change. She then tried to convince me that it was all my fault because I didn't force her to wear the sunscreen and that the honeymoon was ruined. It was then that I realized I picked the wrong person. After a few more psycho arguments, mad at me because of something in her dreams, mad at me because I didn't bring an umbrella, I had to call it quits. I can't stay with someone who constantly blames me for their own problems. Luckily, no kids, and I got back everything I brought into the marriage. Weren't there warning signs before this though? Like, you say you were together for 5 years, and now all of a sudden on the honeymoon she's acting like this? You must have seen this behavior before. Not me, but my sister's friend. Her sister got engaged 8 months into a relationship and got married 4 months later. Everything went well the first 5 months, but the husband started acting different. He wasn't chatty, his good morning and good night kisses became dull, and things like that. Her sister would ask if everything was okay, and he would say, "I'm fine," every time. Her sister didn't want to push him, so she waited for him to talk about what's bothering him. One evening, after eating dinner, the husband said he wanted to talk about their relationship. Before he could talk about it, he started crying. He cried for a few minutes and then told her he's gay. The sister filed for divorce, and after the divorce was settled, she wasn't really mad at him anymore. So she went to see him and forgave him. They became good friends, and the sister helped him become comfortable with his sexuality. She even helped him come out to his close friends and then to his family. 5 years later, the sister is now engaged to another man and expecting their first child. The ex-husband is now very happily married to a man for almost a year now. I'm glad we got one nice happy ending out of all of these. She went out for a girls' night and met a new friend named Nicole at a bar. She started texting her a lot, then going to hang out now and then. We had a baby at home and she kept trying to go hang out with this girl from another town over with no last name who I was not allowed to meet. His real name was Wesley. Ouch. I kind of thought she was going to turn out to be a lesbian, not gonna lie. I'd been fooling around with this girl for a while. I never wanted anything serious, and I knew that from the start. Then my mom was killed. I went into a deep depression, and this girl was there for me. Her mom had died of cancer about a year earlier, and I guess we really bonded over that. It pushed us much further emotionally than we ever should have gone. We ended up doing a courthouse marriage. I knew within the first month that I had messed up, but I didn't want to just give up and get divorced. Once the emotions of my mom's death passed, I realized how toxic she really was. She was an incredibly unstable person and ended up taking me into an even deeper depression. We divorced about a year ago after being married for about 10 months, and I was immediately much happier. Marriage shouldn't be taken lightly, but people also shouldn't force themselves to be in unhealthy relationships. We all make mistakes. Don't waste your life with someone that doesn't deserve you. It can be hard to end a relationship for a lot of different reasons. Something like this, I really do understand. You were both in a tough place and needed each other for support, but you just took it further than it was ever really meant to go. My sister got a civil marriage, then they moved super far away to the middle of nowhere because he got a good job. My sister never finished college, and he would remind her on a daily basis about it. She would get super depressed, and he wouldn't believe her. She got sick once, and he told her that since she didn't go to the DMV that day, she wasn't allowed to go to a theme park we were planning on going to that weekend. He would demean her whenever she couldn't get a job, or even an interview, and she applied to practically everywhere within a 50-mile radius. He called her stupid in front of me, and when I called him out, he told me to mind my own business. If he wasn't twice my size, I would have decked him. She left him after about a year because he's obviously a raging jerk. When she left, he told her she has nowhere to go, and if she went to stay with our mom, she would just be a burden like me. I was 19 and in college at the time. He's a rude jerk, but at least she got the car and the dog. This dude sounds like more of a waste of skin than he was ever accusing her of being. A cousin of mine divorced her husband after 6 months. She knew when we had to pick her up from her home after having been recently beaten. That day, we packed up all her stuff and never let her go back. The day after we got married, he slapped me across the face, hard and completely out of the blue. No argument, no conversation leading up to it, nothing. He said it wasn't that hard of a hit, and he was just joking around and I was being dramatic. He had never gotten violent with me while dating, but as soon as we got married, it was like a switch flipped, and he was a completely different person. It got worse very quickly, and I ended up filing for divorce 73 days after we got married. My mother-in-law got married for the first time when she was really young. Left him a month later. Turns out he was a raging alcoholic. She had no idea because her family was super overprotective, and they were never really allowed to spend time together alone before they got married. Who knew that spending time with someone could be the key to knowing if they're a good partner? That's why I could never get behind the idea of an arranged marriage. The whole thing just sounds crazy to me. Not within a year, but about 18 months. She was constantly complaining she didn't have friends after moving in with me, joined a local soccer team, and she talked about one teammate non-stop for months. I had a bad feeling about it from the get-go, but she assured me they were just friends, and how dare I not trust her. I thought I was going crazy because my gut told me something wasn't right, but I was punishing myself for being a bad husband and not trusting my wife. Turns out it was all true. She'd been screwing the teammate for months. She was most likely screwing someone else during our engagement. We officially split amicably as of last week without any mess, thank God. A cousin of mine married someone who seemed like the perfect woman. They worked in the same store together, and he would brag about how his wife was getting promoted quickly in the company. A few months into the marriage, she tells him she's going out with friends for the evening. An hour or so later, my cousin gets a call from one of his friends. The friend saw her having dinner in a restaurant with the manager of the store that they both worked at. Once he confronted her about it, that was basically the end of the marriage. I mean, if she's not a great worker, then her getting all those promotions might have been an earlier clue. I got married in late May. By August or September, I found out from my dad that my husband, now ex, and my brother's wife were sending some inappropriate texts back and forth. She was also my bridesmaid at my wedding. She felt guilty and told my dad, who had to tell me. I forgave him like a dingus, and about a year and a half later, I found pictures of him fooling around with 2 different guys in our house, and also wearing quite a bit of my nice makeup. Of course, all of this after we moved to Washington from Florida. It's been wild, but we're obviously divorced now. Whoa, so this dude was just willing to fool around with anyone, it sounds like. My brother died a week after the wedding, and after about 2 months, he told me that was just too big of a thing to happen in the beginning of a marriage. I tried for 6 more months and then just gave up. It's really sad to hear that the husband couldn't find it in them to be able to support their new wife through a very hard time. This has got to be one of the most selfish things I've ever heard. You'd committed to spending your entire life with someone. Something goes bad in the first week and you're out? I can't begin to understand. A couple of weeks into our marriage, anytime we would fool around, it started to physically hurt. I went to my OB for a test or 2. She informed me that I had contracted chlamydia. That's when I knew. Turns out my newlywed husband had been banging his coworker for months. The day after the wedding, when he poked me in the chest and said, "You're gonna do what I say whether you like it or not." Big mistake. I feel like this one could have been playful, but obviously you're the judge of his tone, and it sounds like he wasn't being playful and being serious. In which case, yeah, screw that guy. Best girlfriend I'd had to date at the time. I was in my late 30s and had never been married. Dated for about a year. We got married, and shortly after, she asked to have her name on all of my assets. A few rental houses, the current house, some financial instruments, the cars, and things like that. Not a problem since we're married, I thought. But on a Wednesday, she insisted that it be done by that Friday. I didn't have time to do that because work and a deadline. I could start it the next week, I said. She pitched a fit and said if I loved her, I would do it by Friday. I found this strange and decided not to start it and see what happened. She moved out of our bedroom into a guest room, got cold around the house, told me she would move back into our bedroom when I finished getting everything done. At this point, I thought, bull, and told her so. I went to my family lawyer to seek advice. She advised me not to put anything in her name at this point. Gave me the name of a marriage counselor. She didn't want to go to counseling. She continued to live in the guest room. I took my lawyer's advice and did nothing about the assets. The long and the short of it was that after 1 year of marriage, when on our anniversary, she told me I didn't have her in my heart. I thought to myself, this is bull. About a week after that, I told her if this was the way it's gonna be, I'm not gonna be married like this. She then told me, okay, so what are you gonna give me? Yes, she said that. I consulted my lawyer on what a judge would come up with regarding community property for the past year. Number came up to 20G. I took that number and added another 20 grand and proposed that to her so we can make it easy. I was gonna spend way more than that in lawyer fees if it got ugly. It got ugly. A week later, I got served with papers. With all said in the complaint, when added up, she was going after $750K for 1 year of marriage, 1 year of divorce proceedings, and 2 years of property settlement proceedings on what should have been a 2-hour problem. Judgment came. 215 points in the judgment. I owed her what would have been the community property, about 20 grand, but awarded me attorney's fees. So in the net, she owed me about 30 grand and left her to go buy her own car. Turns out this judge had worked her butt off through school to become a lawyer, and the same to become a judge by 40 years old. I was told by another attorney that normally this judge never gives attorney's fees, but was so peeved off at the gold dig my wife had attempted that she felt it was justified in this case. Even though I came out okay financially, it was an emotional train wreck to have this happen and go through all that. It's been 15 years since it happened. I was not dateable for about 2 years, but now very happy with who I am and who I'm with. Thank God you were able to have a judge that was able to see through this woman's bull. The fact that she ended up having to give you a bunch of money in return just makes it even better. Reddit, what's the funniest thing that a random stranger said to you that made you die laughing inside? I was in the drive-thru of a Wendy's one time. An employee exited the building with his headphones on and was singing "Who Let the Dogs Out" at the top of his lungs. He saw me, stopped singing, and started walking away. A few seconds later, he comes up to my window and said, "Yeah, that is what I'm listening to." Then he walked away. I laughed so hard at the whole situation. I assume he was just doing a bit for his friends inside and you just had the pleasure of witnessing it. Okay, the laughter was not entirely inside, but years ago on the subway in New York, a crazy dude walks on the train and starts screaming at everyone, "You're all going to hell!" and then steps off as the doors close. Total silence as the weirdness of the moment settles in. Then, without missing a beat, guy across from me goes, "Crap, I thought this train was going to Harlem." Entire subway car of cynical New Yorkers bursts out laughing. I gotta admit, that's probably the best response that guy could have come up with. I was helping a customer pick out a new bra, and she said she wanted her breasts to be lifted. She said, "My boobs are so saggy that if my nipples were eyeballs, I'd be able to see if my shoes were untied." I really tried my best to remain professional, but I couldn't stop laughing. She said it to get a laugh out of you. You're allowed to laugh. Was leaving Walmart and the 80-ish-year-old greeter says, "Thanks for shopping at Dollar Tree." Okay, one of two things happening here. Either one, their greeters may be starting to lose it just a little bit, or two, they just like doing it for fun. What are you gonna do, fire the 80-year-old greeter for making a joke? A movie had just ended. Me and my dad joined the mad rush to the bathrooms. Urinals are packed. It's our turn and we're doing our business, and suddenly someone rips a huge fart. It's pretty funny, but we all have manners and we're still peeing. Suddenly this dude proclaims, "It was me!" and runs out the door. The whole bathroom erupts in laughter. I must have been about 10 or 11. I sat down on a bench next to an old guy to sort out my shoe. I took my shoe off and he just turns to me and says, "Are they golfing socks?" I look at him with a completely blank look on my face, thinking, WTF? As I looked away, he just said, "There's a hole in one." This dude saw an opportunity for a dad joke with a random kid and just went for it. I can't say I blame him. The time I was waiting for takeout and the amputee owner struck up a conversation. "My friend, you have to be really careful if you ever get shot in the knee or any leg bone. They don't warn you that you can't have sex for months. One night you're taking home a beautiful girl to show her your scars, and the next morning your leg's gone." I feel like he might not be telling that story correctly. A few years ago, I let a friend cut my hair. It did not go well. I was living in Philadelphia at the time and was walking through South Philly when I passed two strangers in the middle of a conversation. As I pass, one of them says to the other, "Hold up, I gotta talk to this guy." He proceeds to shout at me, "Hey yo, your hair looks horrible, come over here." I was amused, partly because of his bluntness and partially because he wasn't wrong. I was curious, so I walked over to him and he says, "Look, a buddy of mine owns a barber shop 2 blocks away. Here's his business card. I'll write my name on there. If you mention that I sent you, he'll give you a good deal." Bruh, but seriously, take care of that. I never ended up going to his friend's shop, but I frequently use this story as the perfect example of Philly culture. Rude, blunt, and in your face, yet somehow coming from a place of genuine care. Plus, it's just hilarious. A few months ago, I was waiting at a road crossing with loads of other strangers, waiting for the man to turn green. This was a busy main road in my city. The little girl on the other side of the road did the most accurate impression of the beep beep that the crossing makes so blind people know it's safe to cross. And the entire crowd of people just stepped into the road. I had seen her do it, so I stayed put, but I couldn't stop laughing. My girlfriend was very confused. 50 adults pranked by one absolute genius 6-ish-year-old. It was magical. By the way, it was really busy, so traffic was hardly moving. There was no chance of being injured. It could have been a lot worse, but yeah, people need to actually pay attention and not just go off a random audio cue that a 6-year-old gave you. May of 2000, passing through Norwood, Louisiana with a friend. At around 2 in the afternoon, we stopped to gas up and grab some snacks at the most podunk gas station known to man. A young man, extremely agitated, comes in with frustrated gestures and angrily shouts and gestures at the cashier with an accent that is beyond region, beyond stereotyping, beyond anything I have ever heard before. "Where you got John Wally Mellion yet?" At the top of his lungs, approaching hysteria and tears. I feel like I should probably translate this one for you, as I had to read it as it was said. He was asking, "Where are the god-darned watermelons at?" Just to be clear. When I was about 8 years old, 40 some odd years ago, my mother and I were waiting to be seated at a restaurant, and an older gentleman was ahead of us also waiting. The waitress asked him if he'd be smoking, back when that was still a thing in restaurants, and he replied, "No, but I may burst into flames later." Young me laughed all through lunch at that. In fact, it still makes me giggle. The college I attend frequently has local elementary and middle school kids on tours, especially on Fridays. One particular Friday, I was in line for the cafeteria when a group of kids came walking by with a tour guide. One kinda chubby little dude looked a bit uncomfortable. He was biting his lip a little and sweating. This part of the tour is usually where they have a bathroom break, and clearly Buddy needed to go. At this point, I should note that the bathrooms are visible from where we were standing, but the tour guide, a fellow student of mine, didn't seem to notice. She just kept going on and on, talking about the history of the building. I watched this kid go from nervous to deeply anxious to visibly clenching over the span of about 3 minutes. He's staring at the stick figure dude on the men's bathroom sign as if it was the risen Christ. Miss Tour Guide takes a break in her spiel. I figure she's done. The next words out of her mouth will be the ones to free this boy from the purgatory that is having to use the bathroom on a school trip. It'll be over. He'll be free. What followed instead was this. So, in 1995, a professor named ABC Kalamazoo, "Move, lady, I'm gonna poop my pants!" He ran past her to the bathroom and presumably destroyed it. Poor guy. Had the entire line in tears with laughter though. Hey, when you gotta go, you gotta go. Tour guide needs to pick up on these things. When I was a freshman in college, I had a pair of rainbow bell-bottoms that I had made myself and wore quite a bit. I was walking through the city back to the dorms when a guy rode up behind me on a bicycle. He was old, had long scraggly gray hair, and a bright red and yellow windsuit on. He rode beside me for a second, stared, and then yelled, "Miss, your pants are hot! What?" And then rode away into the sunset. It was so random and hilarious. Every time I wore those pants, my friends would run up behind me and yell, "Your pants are what?" Something I overheard as two kids walked past our caravan park site. There's a rumbling boom of distant thunder. I like thunder. It sounds like a 200-year-old dog who's retired and helps old people who are blind get around. Kid number 2 doesn't respond. You know? But why is it retired? Because it's old, but it's still helping blind people. Apparently, the first kid had no answer for that. Just the other day, checking out at the Cracker Barrel, the older gentleman ringing up my wife accidentally said, with all confidence, "Have a thank you." Sounds like the poor guy just mixed up his catchphrases. Not so much said to me as overheard. Walking down the street with my fiance after dinner, a man and a woman passed by us. Very clearly, I heard the man say, "And that's the second time I got crabs. I just keep a special little comb at the house now, just in case." I'm not sure of any particulars and have thought about that interaction often. So many questions. I know they heard me laugh though. I hope this wasn't like a first date he was on or something. I used to be a smoker. One time, a scruffy-looking man asked me for a light. I told him I only had matches. It was very windy. He said, "That's okay, there's a trick to it. You light the match and then suck down real hard. You get a mouthful of sulfur that way, but you gotta have a trick when you're going 30 miles an hour on top of the tank." I once was canoeing with my fiance for the first time, and we were having a bit of trouble at first getting a rhythm going. So we were along the edge of the water hitting the canal. This random couple was walking along the wall, and the guy said to his wife while pointing at us, "Canoeing, the truest test of love." My fiance and I burst into laughter for 20 minutes, and then finally got our rhythm together. That guy sounds like he's been where you are. "You and your sister look exactly alike." My sister was adopted from Asia. I'm so white I freckle instead of tan. I just about died of laughter because the woman actually meant it. For context, she'd met my sister a couple weeks before, but I hadn't been there, and she'd mistaken me for my sister. I'm as white as a fluorescent light bulb and my foster daughter is black. Of course, I introduce her as my daughter when we're out. Some people would be like, "She's your daughter?" I would pull her closer and point back and forth to our faces and say, "We're practically twins, can't you tell?" That usually got people to laugh. I was at a 50th wedding anniversary party and there were lots of elderly people in attendance. An old man was standing next to me and said, "It looks like a graveyard in here." I literally spit my beer out. We were outdoors. The kicker was the guy was close to the same age as everyone else. I'm in the bathroom at work washing my hands, and one of the professors that I don't think I've ever actually spoken to comes in and starts washing her lanyard in the sink. I try to make small talk with work people even though I suck at it. So I try to strike up a conversation that goes down as follows. "Morning. I spilled coffee on my lanyard and now it's all sticky." Wow, that's the worst. At this point, she turns off the faucet and looks at me completely deadpan, with eyes that said she wanted to feed me my own innards, and said, "I think genocide is worse." So I awkwardly mumbled, yeah, okay, bye, have a nice day, and quickly escaped. It's turned into a running joke in my office now, though. Anything from the printer being out of toner to a fire drill on a cold day is literally worse than genocide. Why did she have to take it to such an extreme? You're just trying to make casual conversation. I watched a guy walking to class at my college years ago saying, "Get the hell out of my way," to a pigeon standing in his path. The pigeon quickly waddled off to the side. I was doing tech support over the phone for an internet company at a call center. I got a call from an elderly woman whose internet had stopped working. After checking that the modem was working and that there were no issues in her area, I was scheduling a visit from one of our technicians when she suddenly says, Oh, I know what happened. The cat was playing around the router yesterday. Right. You think it took a cable or something? No, he probably took away the Wi-Fi. You mean like he moved the router? No. He probably took the airwaves of the Wi-Fi. You know how cats see things we can't? He surely saw the Wi-Fi signal, grabbed it, and took it away. It took all my willpower to finish the call and not laugh in her face. Yeah, sometimes it's easier to just let things go than to try and explain. I was crossing the street once and my sunglasses fell off my shirt directly to the floor. I just realized it had happened after I got to the other side of the street and my mom pointed it out. The closest car was pretty far away, but I was still very anxious about it. I ran back into the middle of the street and tried to grab it, but was so nervous it fell out of my hands 2 times before I finally got it and ran to the other side of the street again. The car finally reaches us and the driver stops, rolls down the windows and says, "That's what I call survival instinct," and drives away. I laughed so hard. Years ago, when queuing up for movie tickets with my family, the attendant asked the ages of our 4 kids to see if they could all get children's price tickets. I announced their ages 7, 9, 11, and 13. Without missing a beat, the stranger behind us declared, "That's an odd group." Don't worry, they'll even out next year. My friend and I, both female, used to go to the Saturday market to buy fruit and veg. My friend is quite shy towards other people. I had just bought 2 huge watermelons and was carrying them, 1 arm each. As a guy walked past us, he shouted, "You've got nice big melons." Didn't say anything else, just kept walking. My friend was shocked, and I almost peed myself laughing so much. First day in basic training. All hell had broken loose. It was just screaming and confusion. I had an instructor come up to me with another kid in tow and yell, "Trainee, do you know where the latrine is? I want to escort this trainee to the latrine so he can go sick himself in the proper facilities." I didn't know where they were, but figured I'd give it my best shot. So myself and this kid walk outside. I look over at him and he's greenish, kind of whimper crying and hunched over. We take 2 steps outside when he pops. Projectile vomit all over the ground. A huge mess. I look up and see an even bigger, scarier instructor rounding the corner about 15 feet in front of us. He walks up, looks the kid in the eye, and with an icy hatred says, "What did you just do to my ground? Do you really hate my ground so much you'd sick yourself on it? I want you to apologize to my ground and then clean yourself up." I nearly lost it. The kid whimpered out a, "Sorry I puked on you ground," and we were on our way. In college, this one girl in the front of the room chimes in on something and mentioned that her eyes change color depending on the summer every year, from blue to green. This black dude in the back of the class whispers to his friend, "Yeah, and I turn white in the winter." I had to remove myself immediately before I made a scene from laughing so hard. I was rollerblading down a hill too fast and landed on my butt. Painful, sure, but not excruciatingly so. An old man walked by and said in the most jolly voice, "Is your behind okay, young lady?" I was shaking of laughter. My behind was okay, yes. I'm a hostess at a restaurant and my coworker was holding the door open for this table of 4 very old black women. And this woman who had just celebrated her 102nd birthday says to her friend, "Can you imagine that? Never thought I'd see the day a white boy holds the door open for us. Oh, if I was younger, I'd have to make my way to you, young man." When I was around 10, my dad took my brother and me to a Sox game at Fenway. We got to the park and I was putting mustard on a hot dog from one of those mustard box push-down nozzle things. This random guy next to me goes, "Yeah, buddy, lather it up." 10-year-old me thought it was about the funniest thing I'd ever heard, and I still chuckle when I think about it as an adult. I'm at a festival and sitting around a campfire when a very intoxicated man kept saying, "I need to borrow your fireplace." He wouldn't let it go, despite being right by the fire. Turns out he needed a lighter for his cigarette and was so drunk that he forgot what it was called. My laughter was not internal. I died laughing right in front of him. I was riding the public bus in Vegas about 13 years ago. I'm sitting kind of in the middle. There's this guy sitting kind of towards the front, having an extremely animated conversation with another guy next to him. The other guy looks like he's barely acknowledging what animated guy is saying. We get to a stop and animated talker guy gets up, but other guy doesn't. It was then that I realized that they weren't together, and that this dude was just talking in a semi-crazy way to some rando dude on the bus. But animated talker doesn't want to get off. He wants the other guy to acknowledge that he was right about something. The other guy is just nodding and trying to get on with his life, but this lunatic just kept yammering away. There gets to be some audible grumbling from the other riders because this dude is now holding up the bus. He finally goes to get off. The dude almost makes it to the sidewalk when he does an about face, gets back on the bus, and yells out, "And another thing!" At that second, nearly everyone on the bus yelled the guy to get off. He obviously wasn't expecting it, as he kind of recoiled and skittered away. The guy does this awkward half-run thing directly into a psychiatrist's office. It was at this moment that an older gruff guy who was sitting in the back and quietly reading a newspaper this entire time pipes up and says, "Going to see the psychiatrist, go figure." Everyone on the bus, including myself, just busted out laughing. Not to me, but I was nearby. I was in a supermarket in the fruit and veg section. Two women were arguing behind me. One says, "We should get this." The other responds, "No, we're getting this one. It's better, I should know." The first, sounding upset, says, "Yeah, but..." The other interrupts and says, "You know I was a chef. I worked at KFC." I had to go 2 aisles over so they didn't hear me howling with laughter. I don't think it counts as a chef if you work at KFC. You're not really making food. You're just kind of heating it up. I was walking to class the other day and walked by 2 girls FaceTiming their friend, and I hear this. "Oh my god, we saw y'all broke up. What happened?" "He drank directly out of my Brita water filter." If I heard that just walking past me, there's no way I'd be able to contain myself. Little girl to me after I explain my service dog helps me when I'm sick. "Oh, so he's your dog tour." Me trying to keep a straight face. Yes, exactly. Kids got the puns, I gotta say. I never would have thought of that. When I served, I had a table of about 20 Asian people. The head of the group shook my hand and introduced himself as Tony the tiger. He tried to sound cool and tough, but all I could think of was the cereal mascot. How are you going to name yourself after a cereal mascot and try and take yourself seriously? Come on, buddy. Not me, but one of my customers. He's doing a finishing job for a billionaire in the city, when the designer insists that they use booties or shoe covers. He said he just had his men take their shoes off at the door. Billionaire woman responds, "Peter, their socks on my carpet is like your penis in my vagina. Disgusting." Funniest thing I've heard in a while. That's gotta be one of the harshest burns I've heard in a while. I have a 5.5-pound chihuahua. He's about as intimidating as a bunny rabbit. I was walking him on the grass along the road. A couple of walkers were coming near me, and my dog started barking at them, so I picked him up. The guy says, "Thank you for picking him up. We were so scared." On the L in Chicago, a group of older guys with shoe shine kits gets off at a stop. One of them drops a small bag of white powder that I presume to be illegal. Another younger guy bends down, picks it up, and tells the guy, "You dropped this." Older guy grabs the baggie and the doors close. Young guy looks at me and says, "I don't know why I did that." I still laugh about it. The young guy was just trying to be polite, and it overrode any other warning signals. I actually did something very similar when I found a couple in the staircase here in my building heating something up in a spoon with a lighter. As soon as I opened the door, they immediately just tried to take off, but they left another lighter sitting on the stairs. I called out to them to come back and handed them their lighter. I knew exactly what they were doing. I don't know why I still felt the need to be polite. What was your "I was only gone X minutes, what the heck happened" story? One night I was on my own and decided to make a nice meal for myself. I spent about half an hour preparing and baking a delicious chicken breast with sun-dried tomatoes and brie cheese. So I got everything ready, set up my dinner and my beer on the coffee table, and sat down to eat and watch some TV. At this point, my cat waltzes in and sat on the couch next to me. Then he dropped something out of his mouth next to me. I turned to look at it, and it was a snake. Okay, no big deal. It's not a big one. So I got up and grabbed some snake wrangling tools, a dustpan and brush, and scooped this little guy up. I walked out the front door and tossed the snake back into the bushes, hoping the cat won't go after it again. I was gone for about 15 seconds. I came back inside and my dinner was gone. The cat was under the table, hunched over a half-eaten chicken breast and growling every time I came near. And that's the first time my cat distracted me with a snake in order to steal my dinner. I was gonna say, this literally sounds like the cat plotted this out to get your food. I left my 2-year-old twins for 2 minutes. They were happily glued to the TV, and I thought it was the perfect opportunity to sneak to the kitchen and finish making my coffee. They continued being quiet, and I found it strange, as they normally come and follow me when I leave the room. I came back, and there was soil scattered all over my carpet. One was feeding the other a plant. It was our first baby. My wife had never left our little girl, but decided to run an errand, leaving me, Dad, alone with her. I assured my wife all would be well in her short absence. The kid is sleeping in my arms. All is quiet. I give my wife a kiss and she heads out the door. I walk back to the sofa with the sleeping kid. Notice the kid could probably use a diaper change. I set the baby on the changing table, I take off the old diaper, and the baby wakes up and proceeds to erupt with a volcano of projectile diarrhea. It's all over me, the changing table, the wall. I'm now panicking. I pick up the baby, who's still hemorrhaging an unending spray of baby turd mist. I take her to the kitchen sink and flip on the water. The water's still cold, so when I set the baby in the sink, the baby starts screaming like a demon. My wife opens the door. She forgot her purse. Poop all over the walls and floor. Desperate poop-covered husband wrestling with desperate freezing poop-covered baby. My wife was gone maybe 90 seconds, max. Back in 2008, when everyone was getting $600 tax rebate checks in the mail, I left mine unopened on my coffee table, went to use the restroom, and when I got back, I saw the envelope chewed in half, and my dog nowhere to be seen. Somehow, my miniature Dachshund puppy got up on the coffee table, picked through all my other mail to find this specific one, chew it up, and run under the bed, all in about 1 minute. I had to tell the IRS that my dog chewed up my rebate check, which was funny. First day of summer break after grade 7, I went to his skate park with a few friends and one of their dads drove us all. He went to get a coffee and said, "Don't break anything until I get back." And I did not listen. I went down a quarter pipe and broke both my radius and ulna on my first try. He got back and I was sitting on a bench holding my crooked arm. At that point, he's gotta just laugh when he comes back, right? Like, he totally called it. When my daughter was around 3.5, I picked her up from daycare on my way home from work, walked in the door, and set her down in the living room to play while I put the mail I had grabbed on the way into the house on the table in the kitchen, which was less than 10 feet away. I dropped the mail on the kitchen table, turned around, and walked back into the living room, and she's butt naked. It was literally less than 5 seconds. I'm still amazed when I think about it. I can't even get my shoes off that fast. Sounds like maybe she was just trying to play a prank on you. Comcast and FedEx both left a "just missed you" at my door when I was gone for 5 minutes to shower, during the latter quarter of a 5 to 6 hour time frame. Yeah, we've all been there for this one. I experienced being hunted by a tow truck in Chicago. A friend and I were delivering a couple big monitors to his apartment. We pulled around behind the building, but he didn't have the key for the back door. So we quickly ran around front and came out the back door of his apartment to see the car gone. Like, not going, or the tow truck loading up the car. It was gone. We couldn't have taken more than 90 seconds. Wow, those repo guys are pretty slick, huh? I grew up in the country. One day in high school, I came home, made myself a snack, and then went back outside to eat my snack on the deck. When I got home, the yard was empty. When I came back out, there was a zebra in the yard. And that's how we found out the new neighbors ran an exotic animal petting zoo, and that they weren't very good at it. They lived there for a couple of years, and we got really nonchalant about that zebra getting out. My grandma came to visit once and came in all in a tizzy about it. I think it was even more shocking when our response was basically, "That darn zebra again." I was in middle school. I went to the bathroom because the lesson was boring me out of my mind. You know, I was 12. And I stayed there for around 10 minutes. When I returned to class, I saw 2 cops dragging 2 of my classmates. They were handcuffed and visibly terrified. Found out sometime later that they were arrested for drugs. And the cops came in the class and handcuffed them right there. The cops heard you were bored and came to put on a show. Too bad you weren't there to see it. I was boiling water on an electric stovetop. Seemed safe enough. Left for 30 seconds. Came back and the entire stove was on fire with 2-foot flames. Someone had let some oily food fall between the burner and the tin foil we keep underneath. Another 30 seconds and the kitchen would have caught fire. I live above the pizza place that I work at. I'm also full-time in college. Last night, they called me in for just an hour or two to help close. No big deal. After a full school day and going into work for a bit, I was exhausted. I walked upstairs and into my apartment. There was new decorations everywhere, my furniture was gone, and my bedroom door was open. I screamed, "Holy crap!" and kicked open the door to see who was in my room. I was only gone for an hour. How could someone move in and move all of my stuff? As I made contact with the girl lying in bed watching Netflix, I realized I was on the second floor, not the third floor. The apartment below me has the exact same layout as mine, and this girl happened to have her door unlocked like I usually leave mine. We have multiple roommates. I simply said, "Oops, wrong room," and ran back to my room. I'm going to go down today and apologize for scaring that poor girl half to death at 11 p.m. I went to work one day. I literally lived right across the street from my job, so I walked to work each day. By the time I got to work, my boss told me I needed to go back home. It was an emergency. Apparently my power had been cut off. My stepdad had flipped out and scared the crap out of my siblings, and apparently attempted to hurt my pregnant mom. Apparently the power department came out and cut off our power due to non-payment of bills. My stepdad started screaming and cussing about it, which scared my siblings. My mom got into an argument with him, telling him to calm down and demanding to know why the power was cut off. He revealed that instead of paying our bills, he'd been blowing all of the money. This led to more arguing. Stepdad got angrier and started choking my mom, which is when my siblings called my job to have me come home. I had to fight him off. We all got out of the house, went back across the street, and called the cops. This was before cell phones were common. The cops come out about 45 minutes later, question us, take pictures of the marks on my mom's neck, then go question stepdad. The cops come back, escort us out of the house, tell us to pack our bags, and for us to leave. Stepdad gets to stay in the house, even though he wasn't on the lease. They don't arrest him and tell us we can't come back until my mom has a restraining order against him. We leave and stay with my aunts, and it takes 2 weeks to get a restraining order. Only then are we allowed back in the house, and by then he's trashed most of our stuff. Nothing was ever done to him except the cops finally made him leave. Wow, this is probably one of the most intense and scary versions of this kind of story. I was working on my senior chemistry project in college. I brought samples down to the NMR room for analysis. I forgot something upstairs, ran up to grab it, came back down, and found a metal folding chair stuck to the instrument. An NMR is similar to an MRI machine in that it's a gigantic sensitive magnet that metal should never be near. In this time I went upstairs, another student thought she left a sample probe in the instrument, couldn't eject the probe, and brought the chair over to look down into the instrument to find it. The chair got stuck to the instrument and she had to find my professor to remove it. Luckily, the magnet did not quench upon chair removal. Yeah, this could have been a very expensive mistake. A little over a year ago, my now husband and I were prepping for a move and needed to take a handful of garbage bags to the dumpster in our apartment community. We patted each of our 2 small dogs on the head and headed out. Less than 5 minutes later, we come back, both of the dogs meeting us at the door with wagging tails and big smiles. All seems perfect until we round the corner into the dining room. One of the dogs had pooped clear up 2 walls, about 4.5 feet up and 6 feet wide worth of wall. I was laughing too hard to clean it up. My husband saved the day and cleaned it up for me. But with such force and distance, we can only imagine the absolutely gut-wrenching noise that dog had to have made when it did its big business. Yeah, that's one where I would probably prefer that it happened when I wasn't in the room. I left the mail rooms to go get my wipes to clean off the scanner glass. Was gone about 3 minutes. Came back to find the entire mailroom coated in toner, and a toner-covered coworker just standing there looking confused and alarmed. I didn't even ask. I just went to go get our boss to deal with it. I can only imagine how much of a pain it was to clean all of that up. Not gone per se, but asleep. I was flying LAX to SFO. My flight was delayed about 5 hours, so I did what any sensible frequent traveler does. I went to the club lounge and drank as much free bourbon as they would allow. We finally boarded the plane. I was in one of the first groups because, again, I fly a lot. So by the time we take off, I'm fast asleep. The captain comes on the intercom and says, "Don't panic, seatbelts on, etc." Drunkenly, I look out the window to see some smoke. And holy crap, there's smoke in the cabin? The lady next to me explains we've only been in the air 10 minutes and are about to make an emergency landing in Santa Barbara. Yeah, I'm sure that's a scary moment to wake up to. I fell asleep on the couch for like 10 minutes, I swear. Woke up to mayhem. 2 toddlers had scribbled all over the walls. The younger one had begun scribbling with crayon, and the older one, 3, became upset he was breaking the rules. So she grabbed a pencil and began marking giant X's as large as she could make. "You can't draw here, or here, or here." I woke up to the entire first floor covered in pencil X's and crayon scribbles everywhere. I have a 2-year-old. The other day, I ran to the bathroom and he was sitting down, pacified with Daniel Tiger and homemade trail mix. I came back, probably 2 minutes later, to find a mushroom cloud of flour and him standing on top of a bookshelf with a closed jar of peanut butter and covered in flour. Sounds like he was trying to make a sandwich or something. Several years ago, I was in the process of making dinner and had left a plate of flour tortillas on the kitchen bar. Went out to the garage with my husband for about 90 seconds to look at something. I hear a very loud thud from the kitchen. That thud was our dog jumping down off the bar, and he was now standing in the middle of the kitchen, wolfing down flour tortillas like they were going out of style. What makes it funny is that our bar is about 42 inches high, and the dog was a basset hound. A frickin' fat, stubby-legged basset hound. To this day, we still can't figure out how he got up there, or how he got down without breaking a leg. Hey, if a dog smells food, it'll find a way. Back in grade 11, I had my friend and his girlfriend come over to hang out on a night that my parents weren't home. The worst part was that we weren't drinking. We were all playing Mario Party. I got up and went to the bathroom for literally 30 seconds. I come back and they're completely naked and screwing on my bed. That's just rude. I actually have that moment to my friends. I was outside at a house party and needed to pee. There was someone in the bathroom, so I told my friends I was going to go around the side of the house to pee where no one could see. A few minutes later, I come back all bloody and dirty, and they're freaking out. What I didn't know was there was a steep ditch right next to the house. Being a female, if I pee outside, I try to support myself by doing a sort of wall sit so I don't wind up peeing on my legs or clothes. So I pulled down my pants and tried to do the wall sit on the side of the house. I was crazy drunk, so I lost my balance due to the incline of the ditch. I scraped myself up on the brick wall trying to catch myself, and tumbled pants down in the ditch. I pulled myself up, went back to my friends and said, "I think it's time for me to go home." This happened just last night. After putting the kids to bed and having a bit of a workout, my wife told me to shower off and get to the bedroom. I jumped in the shower, scrubbed up, rinsed, and was out in a matter of minutes. She was already asleep. There's nothing more fun than trying to go to sleep once the launch sequence has been initiated. Yeah, that's one way to put it. Years back, I had a little thing celebrating my new apartment. Just a few close friends and a couple of not so close friends. We're having a good time, drinks were being had, and eventually the need for greasy takeout food was too strong to ignore. Everyone was pretty marinated, some more than others, but driving was out of the question. Me and my bro take everyone's orders and we stroll to the taco place around the corner. When we return, most everyone is on the porch having smokes. Everything seemed normal. When I walk into the apartment, there he is, we'll call him Waldo, passed out on my couch. Vomit running down the side of his face, vomit dripping down my new couch, vomit on my brand new rug. Apparently, when we left, they started chugging whiskey, which obviously didn't agree with old Waldo. I only went for tacos. So my wife is pregnant right now. First trimester is pretty exciting. We were at our friend's house and I was helping my bro cook some burgers. My wife was hanging out in the kitchen with my buddy's wife and was holding their baby. I'm walking back and forth between the grill and the kitchen. Get a fork, get a plate, get that seasoning, that kind of stuff. Anyway, I'm in and out of the kitchen for less than a minute and see my wife puking into their kitchen sink, with the entire front of her clothes covered in baby poop. I guess their baby decided to drop the mother of all poop bombs right in my wife's lap. First trimester, so she's totally sensitive to smells and whatnot, but she totally lost all of her cookies right in front of everyone at our friend's house. I guess the baby was just trying to get her ready for what it's gonna be like. He had good intentions. That Super Bowl where Janet Jackson was topless. Well, lucky me, I had to pee right before the halftime fiasco because it was getting really boring. As I'm peeing, everybody starts screaming and hooting, and I had a mini heart attack and peed on the back of the toilet. Now, anytime I feel myself get bored, I think about that day, and it forces me to stick through the boredom in case there's suddenly boobies. My girls were like 4 and 6 years old. One summer evening, I left them at home with their dad while I ran to the store to pick up a few things. I couldn't have been gone more than an hour. When I pull into the driveway and get out of the car, I can hear both girls screaming and their dad roaring. I sigh and straighten my shoulders and walk into the house, braced for whatever disaster is awaiting me. I go through the front door, round the corner, and see my husband lying in the hallway holding his head. His roars have subsided to a painful groaning. I hear scuffling behind the girl's closed bedroom door. I step over my husband's prone form and burst into the bedroom to catch the girls in the process of climbing out their bedroom window. I got everyone settled down and finally got the story out of them. It seems my husband thought it would be hilarious to scare the girls. So he got out the scream mask, put it on, and tiptoed down the hallway. He stuck his head through the half-open door, and before he could make any scary sound, the 6-year-old glanced up and saw him, and immediately leapt to her feet and slammed the door, pinning his head. When he recoiled from that impact, he staggered backward, cracking the back of his head on our bedroom doorframe and collapsed to the floor. The girls were planning to escape next door. The moral of the story is don't mess with defenseless little girls. Sometimes they'll mess you up. You know what? I'd be pretty darn proud of my little girls in this situation. Baby powder everywhere. I'm talking in the silverware drawer, under the couch, inside the couch, on top of the picture frames. It clogged and broke the vacuum. I slipped on a thin layer of it trying to get the vacuum out of the closet. Baby powder on tile is very dangerous. I hate baby powder. I wanted to try tattooing. I bought a gun and was practicing on some oranges and stuff. I had some friends come over and one of them volunteered to get a simple little bomb done on him. I did it and it turned out good. I went out for a smoke break for 5 minutes and then came back in to the rest of the guys tattooing themselves with the same needle. One of them tattooed a circle on their arm by literally holding it like a child holds a crayon and just did overlapping circles. And the other tattooed his ex-wife's name across his forearm in a similar fashion. Started okay, but slowly got bigger and worse near the end of the name. Serious WTF moment. Oh, the worst part of that story is them reusing the same needle. That's just a bad idea no matter what. You want to give yourself a stupid tattoo, that's entirely up to you, but at least use a fresh needle. A regular day in the gym. I was working out my back. A couple of guys were doing flat bench and hanging out. I had to go take a leak and was gone for 2 minutes tops. Come back to see one of the guys sporting a pec tear with a spectacular purple bruise blossoming on it. He was crying, practically bawling while a doc tended to him. Turns out, while ego benching, he tried to do 405 and paid the price. I was at work and I went outside to grab a smoke. I come back in and one of the receptionists that I had a crush on is blushing and everyone else is laughing. I ask what happened and they let me know that she got her belly button pierced the night before and wanted to show everyone but was wearing a dress. She decided to flip up her dress to show everyone anyway and forgot that she wasn't wearing any underwear. I wanted my wife to have a good morning, so I made breakfast for her. It was pancakes with her favorite syrup and a glass of orange juice. I thought it would be nice for her to be able to eat it in bed, so I woke her up and brought her the tray. I realized I forgot a napkin, so turn around to go get one. And as soon as I make it out of the room, I hear silverware hitting together and a really sad voice say, "Oh, come back." I turn around and there's orange juice everywhere, pancakes on the bed, and she's looking at me like I did something wrong. Evidently, she'd reached for a Kleenex and her juice started tipping on the tray, and she panicked and overcompensated. Trying to make her day nice made it awful. Story of my wife's life. Well, hey, it was a nice thought, at least you were trying. You can't account for that. What's the most significant "you just messed with the wrong person" moment you've witnessed or experienced? I stopped in Reno overnight while moving across the country. Had everything I own in a little beater I bought for the trip. All night, I'm keeping an eye on the parking lot. There's a cop car in the lot. Sure enough, late that night, I see a shady guy walking slowly along the line of parked cars, scoping them out. To my surprise, he decides the cop car is the one he wants to break into. So he takes off his shirt, wraps it around his arm, and starts hitting the window with his forearm. I call the front desk and let them know what's going on. The lady says she's calling the cops. I tell her it's a cop car he's trying to break into, and ask if there's a cop staying in the hotel. She says that she'll check. About 30 seconds later, a very angry man in his boxers thunders out of his room and tackles the dude. He messed with the wrong person. Why of all the cars would he decide that the cop car was the one to break into? That just sounds like a bad plan from the start. My father recently told me a story about this jerk who he works with driving trucks for different distributors. They have no smoking areas because of food productions and things like that, but this jerk decided to smoke there anyway, putting his butts out in a styrofoam cup. Anyway, after a while, his truck was loaded, and he decided to just throw the cup out the window after getting his truck, when a man walked past and asked him calmly to pick up the cup and put it in the bin. To which this intellectual giant of a driver says, "If it's so important, why don't you put it in the bin?" before driving off. Without making much of a reaction, he picked it up, walked to the bin, then makes his way back inside. When my father gets back to the main truck depot, he sees this driver getting yelled at by his boss. Turns out there was a conference being held with some overseas members of the company and the CEO. The CEO whom was told to pick up the cup. They instantly barred the driver from the site and all associated sites, and my father's boss had to jump through hoops to not lose the contract renewal. I can't imagine the level of ecstasy that CEO would have felt during the whole situation, knowing that this prick doesn't know who he is. When I was a senior in high school, I was at some house party. There was this chick named Rachel there, a notoriously crazy girl who was known for causing trouble anywhere she went. She was also a pretty big girl, maybe 5'9" with broad shoulders. Anyway, out of nowhere, she just starts screaming at another girl, Sarah, a shorter, skinny thing, who was honestly on the other side of the room doing absolutely nothing. Rachel gets up in her face, starts cussing her out, and pushing her multiple times, obviously just trying to start something for the heck of it. Rachel finally decides to throw a punch, and I kid you not, like a flash of lightning, Sarah just launches at Rachel, starts beating the crap out of her face, knocks her on her butt, and strongholds Rachel's hair and starts slamming her skull on the brick fireplace in the house. I think she must have knocked Rachel out for a minute, because Sarah decided she was done and just stood up and walked away. Turns out Sarah's older sister was a competitive female boxer and showed her a thing or two about fighting. Lesson learned, just because they're small doesn't mean they can't beat the crap out of you. There's this old, miserable looking man with a nickel who seems to just ride the subway all day. The nickel man only seems to have one purpose in his life. He sticks out his hand with a nickel on his palm and he just points it at you. It's like he's asking for you to look at his plain old nickel. He's like a reverse panhandler. One night, I was coming home drunk and saw the nickel guy. He was doing his usual rounds and he came to me. He stuck out his hand and like usual, you just let him be. But I was tipsy and I pulled the nickel out of his hand. Within seconds, he went from normal nickel guy to crazy rip your face off yelling angry gorilla man. Once I put it back, he became normal nickel guy again. I was mortified. The nickel's obviously very important to him. He just wants to show it off. One night during my junior year of high school, some of my buddies came by and asked if I wanted to go party with them. I didn't know the person throwing the party, but I said screw it and went with them anyway. It turned out to be one of the most surreal nights of my life. We got there and only knew a handful of people out of the 50 or so people that were there. There were a lot of people from different schools, so I knew that eventually something was going to happen. Soon after, one kid, we'll call him Ron, pulls out a piece and starts bragging about how his parents bought it for him and no one should mess with him. Then he starts pointing it at people to show off the laser sight on it. The guy throwing the party, we'll call him John, saw this and told him to stop pointing it at people. Ron said something like, "Screw off, don't tell me what to do, I do what I want." It got a little heated, but then it all seemed to get worked out and Ron put it away. About 5 minutes later, Ron had the piece out again, and trying to be slick and prove he was a bad boy, pointed it right at John's back. When he did, John just happened to turn and saw Ron pointing it at him. I don't remember his exact words, but John said something to the effect of, "Oh, you want to mess with me? I'll be right back." He started jogging to the house. We were in the front yard. And I told my friends, we need to leave. This is about to get crazy. While John was jogging to the house and while he was inside, Ron seemed confident at first. But then he realized he'd gotten himself in a terrible situation and started to walk quickly to his car. John was not far behind, however, with a much bigger piece of his own. Ron got to his car and got in, but he was blocked in and couldn't move. John walked up to the car and tapped on the window. Ron cracked the window about an inch and was crying, probably begging for his life. All while John calmly talked to him. I couldn't hear what was said, but I did hear John finally say, "Stop crying, you look like a real wuss." He started to walk away, but then all of a sudden he stopped, turned around, and fired at Ron's face from about 8 to 10 feet away. We all thought for sure that we had just witnessed a murder and scattered like roaches when you turned the lights on. I remember looking back and seeing John calmly walking back into the house while everyone was running around him. That was what freaked me out the most. His calmness. Turns out Ron lived, and John was charged with attempted murder and a few other things. Ron had reconstructive surgery to repair some of the damage, but he was badly disfigured. I don't remember if John was found guilty or not, but I do remember hearing that Ron won a settlement from John's family. He bought a new Cadillac and whatever else he wanted, but he was super depressed about his disfigured face and got hammered constantly. He died in a single car drunk driving accident not too long after. I'll never forget that night. That got insanely out of control. Those are not toys. You don't just wave them around. And you definitely don't use them unless it is absolutely necessary. I live in front of a hospital parking lot. Some guy in an expensive car cut in line. A lady in a van was super peeved and kept honking. He got out to calm her down. She got out, ripped off her wig, and started screaming and pointing at the cancer center entrance. He looked like he wet himself and got back in his car. Still stayed where he cut in line though. My father and his brother, who were both 6'6", were riding in my uncle's tiny little Chevette, and a guy got road rage and chased them into a parking lot. You could almost see the guy fill his pants when they unfolded themselves out of the car. My dad always tells me this story of how you should never get out of your car after a road rage incident. My mom and him were driving to the city when another driver didn't give my dad the right of way. He almost crashed into my parents, and my mom was pregnant at the time. So of course my dad was angry out of his mind. My dad, being a pretty big dude, wasn't exactly someone to mess with, but out of the little car that almost crashed into my parents, got a man that my dad described as a freaking giant. Dad quickly got back in the car and kept driving. He always gets embarrassed when he tells the story, because my mom still laughs at the face he made when that giant got out of his tiny car. Two drunk guys were bugging this local busker, trying to get him to fight them, saying all sorts of racist stuff. The busker was black. The busker just lost it. Obviously, he had to deal with a ton of drunk jerks. He picked up his guitar and hit one of the drunk guys across the face with it. I called the police when I saw it, and later got called in to give evidence against the drunk guys, who got arrested, saying that they started it. I mean, hey, you got what you asked for. I was covering a hockey game as a sports reporter when I saw the single best retaliation of my life. In my state, if you're female and you want to play hockey with the boys, you can. Typically, the serious girl hockey players will play in these leagues because the girls-only hockey leagues are kinda crap. There was this girl named Alex who I covered since she was a freshman, and she was really good. She'd played since she was a kid, was on some really good travel teams, competed in national camps, got a college scholarship for the sport, and played 4 years in college. Anyway, during her junior year, I'm covering an away game at this crappy arena, and her school is playing one of its rivals, so I know it's gonna be a chippy game. It did not disappoint. This big tough boy notices she's a girl, or had played against her before, and spends the first 2 periods basically trying to intimidate her by checking her hard into the boards whenever she has the puck, and generally doing all the things you know someone is doing to antagonize you. Now, I've seen this girl play, and I know she isn't going to tolerate that, so I just sit and wait for the moment that she snaps. It comes in the 3rd period. The jerk comes running full speed from one side of the ice to the other and gives her one of the worst cheap shot checks I've ever seen. She hits the boards hard, lands on the ice, and the crowd yells because the refs either didn't see it or didn't care, and the play breaks the other way, so everyone else is moving away from them. She doesn't miss a beat though. Calmly, I watch her pick herself up, and the jerk hockey player must have said something to her to cause her to snap, because she takes her helmet off and goes his way. At this point, I can tell he thinks he's going to dismiss this sweet little girl and tell her to play with dolls or something, but he never gets the chance. She socks him right in the jaw and starts beating the crap out of him. It was absolutely amazing. He must have had maybe 50 pounds on her, but she didn't care and beat his butt handily. And because the refs were on the other side of the ice, it took a little bit of time to break them up. She got ejected, he got ejected, but he sulked out of the arena knowing full well he got his butt kicked by a girl. It was phenomenal. 2 kids about 11 years old were bullying this 9-year-old kid by instigating their little sister to go hit and kick him, with the threat that they would beat him up with a hockey stick if he retaliated. The poor 9-year-old pleaded with them to stop, but when they wouldn't, he charged the kid with the hockey stick, took it from him, chased them off, and threw the stick over the fence, then continued to saunter home. I witnessed this from about 50 feet away at age 13. It took place in about a minute, and while I was contemplating a way to help the kid out, he just took matters into his own hands like a G. That kid was not one to mess with. When I was about 10 or so, there was a cricket in my house that I shot with a Nerf gun from a prone position. It dodged it, then jumped at me, and I got up in a panic so fast, the gun flung from my hand into the kitchen, breaking a few glasses. I never messed with crickets again. Didn't you know? Crickets are vicious, dude. I was working in a sketchy part of Albuquerque when I realized a guy was following me through the parking lot. I started walking faster and so did he. I knew I wasn't going to get to my car before he reached me, so I took a knife out of my purse and turned around and shoved it in his face and yelled, "I'm from Wisconsin, I can gut a deer!" The dude took off and I got in my car shaking. That's a really scary moment. I'm glad you were able to defend yourself and got away safely. I lost it at a Subway a while back. This story isn't about me losing it at a person myself, but I found someone who could and did. The Subway I go to is inside a skating rink, and on this day, it was flooded with newly pubescent boys thinking that treating people like absolute crap is how you act like a macho man. One girl behind the counter was near tears, and the other woman was trying to hold her own ground against a bunch of around 13-year-olds. It was stuff like, "You witch, I didn't ask for mayo. Are you blind? For crap's sake, that's not toasted enough. When I get a job, I'm gonna be making more than you." Just a taste of some of what I heard. So I went out to the lobby of the skating rink and found a woman nearby and asked her if she was with the boys in Subway, which she was, and then I told her to follow me. The look on the boys' faces when she let out her angered screech after listening to them was friggin' priceless. She made the boys pay for their own food, One boy didn't even get to finish making his sandwich, with the woman saying, "Wrap it up how it is and he'll pay for it." And from what I gathered as she practically dragged them out of there was the boys who weren't hers, she was going to speak to their parents, followed by strong protests as she told them to pack their crap, as she was taking them home early. I left the girls at Subway a nice tip and they gave me a cookie. Never mess with an angry mom. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall at that moment. That's gotta be the worst kind of jerk there is. The group of 13-year-olds who think they've just got the world figured out and that they're better than you even though they have not accomplished anything. Their kryptonite is their mother, and I love watching that moment. When I played hockey, I got kicked out of a game early, so I had to watch it from the stands. A guy from the other team was chasing one of my teammates around the ice, slashing him, trying to get him to fight. Finally, my buddy dropped his gloves and proceeded to give this dude a man-sized butt whooping. That teammate went on to become an enforcer in the NHL. We're getting a lot of hockey stories today, but I guess that is the one sport where you're technically allowed to fight the other team. After drinking and partying in the haunch outside our base in Japan, my friend and I went to the on-base taxi stand to go back to the barracks. We hail and start climbing into the first open cab we see. This drunken white guy was running for it, but we beat him to it, and we didn't even see him. Anyway, he's furious and starts yelling at us. 2 girls, 1 Latina, the other black. "You stupid friggin' N-word!" And then a group of about 6 black sailors come around the corner to the stand. I don't know how it happened. Maybe Paul Mooney summoned them. Anyway, white guy changed his mind and ends up walking/running to the ships. A fight didn't end up breaking out, but he came really close to getting his butt whooped. I work at a restaurant and 4 punks decided to dine and ditch. They ran out and got away, but luckily I overheard one of their names while they were eating. Long story short, I tracked him down on Twitter, and the direct messages went like this. Me. Haha, nice try. We know who you are. You owe us $40. Bring the money or we're reporting you to the police and your school. You have until Sunday night. 1 minute later. I'm terribly sorry for this horrible incident. I'm bringing the money right now. I'm terribly sorry. It wasn't even my idea. I had no choice but to run also, or else I'm in trouble. We left the bag of money. 15 minutes later after I sent the message, a guy literally opened the front door and threw a Ziploc bag full of $40 of cash and change into the restaurant and ran away. Tools. I bet they thought it was real friggin' funny at the time, too. I work in a law office and regularly have to file documents with the court. I've learned from watching one interaction not to mess with the clerks at the filing window. A lot of people probably don't know or wouldn't believe how detailed the rules are for submitting documents to the court. There are rules regarding the type of paper you can use, the exact spacing of the heading on the paper, the exact measurements of the 2-hole punches at the top of the sheet, all kinds of things. There are literally dozens of rules on how to format your filings. In my experience, these rules are rarely enforced. The clerks will reject documents if there are major errors, missing signatures, or filled out incorrectly, things like that. But will usually let things slide like your 2-hole punches not being precisely 2 3/4 inches apart. But there was one day where I saw a clerk take sweet revenge against someone who had it coming. I was standing in line waiting to file something, and a notoriously huge jerk of an attorney got called up to the window. The clerk asked him something like, "I'm really sorry, Mr. Jerk, but you're missing some attachments to this form." He reacts as if she had just stood from her chair, flipped him the bird, and went and pooped on his mom's grave. He starts yelling about how she didn't know what the heck she was doing, and that a trained monkey could do her job, that he would complain to her supervisor, and on and on and on. He goes stomping away, and she looks much calmer than you would expect for someone who just got reamed out by this enormous jerk. I get called up to her window and say something like, "I'm so sorry you had to deal with that." She replies, "It's fine, he's on my list now." I'm curious, so I ask what she means. Her response was fantastic. She says, "Mr. Jerk handles a lot of family law cases. He'll be wanting to file things here, and his paperwork is bound to land on my desk. For people like him, I get out the formatting sections of the rules of court, and I make sure he's followed every one of them. She points to my filing and says, "Your 2-hole punches look off. You see how one is higher than the other? There's supposed to be a certain distance from the top of the page. I'm not going to reject yours, but next time he drops something off at the filing box, you better believe I'm going to bust out my ruler." I let her know that I think that's awesome. But once he's seen the reason his document was rejected, he'll just have an assistant fix it or whatever. She replies, "We don't have to tell him why it was rejected specifically, just that it violated some rule of formatting. He can figure that out for himself if he ever wants to have another document filed." She looked so happy. This woman has got to be one of the most petty, evil, conniving people I've ever heard of. I want to travel the world with her. What's the quickest you've noped out of a job? It was a shop that refurbished train suspension hydraulics. 40% of the guys were missing at least part of a finger. Maintenance guy was missing 4 on one hand and 1.5 on the other. Half the guys were intoxicated, and the guy training me stormed out halfway through the second day. I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna dip now. I'm sure your fingers really appreciate that decision. Many years ago, I worked at a popular sports bar as a line cook. First day, they had me train with a guy who didn't speak English for 2 hours. Not a huge deal. Mostly you observe people in a kitchen and that's how you learn. The owner came back and said she was scheduling me to be alone the next day, which was Super Bowl Sunday. I noped out of there so fast. I left right then and there. I'm willing to bet the person who left that position before you left for the exact same reason. I worked for a newspaper for most of a week. I was expected to use my own laptop and software. No IT, and I'd have to share logins and passwords with 3 other people and guess when they would need them. For me, it was 1 week. It was 1985 and a collections agency was looking for an IT guy. It was basically desktop support on some IBM PCs. It took me a week to realize what a soul-deadening place that was, and I bolted. It was mutual, actually. They saw how I was reacting to some of the techniques the collectors used. The targets were mostly old people who were encouraged to sell family heirlooms and the like to pay off debts. 3 days after my 2-week training, I was supposed to be a seasonal temp worker for a national propane company. The job distribution and training consisted of taking calls off hours for people who wanted refills and acting as a messenger service, referring their contact info to their local store when they opened the next day. Easy peasy. When I got out onto the floor, I found out I was actually expected to be a dispatcher for drivers, and also the first point of contact for all emergency situations. Things I had never been so much as briefed on in training. My first shift, I had to field a call from a local police officer who was on site to a horrific propane truck crash. I got to wake the guy's district manager in the dead of night, tell him his worker was deceased, and the overturned truck was blocking a few lines of the freeway, and the police were trying to get a hold of him. That was just the start. One customer got the smell of garlic and eggs in their house, and I got the call. "What do I do, Mr. Dispatcher?" How would I know? Get out of the house ASAP? Another customer, the CO detector is going off. I got the call. Instead of 911 for some reason. I had zero interest in being an underpaid, not trained emergency dispatcher. It's the only job I took off on without giving a 2-week notice. I was nice enough to finish out my shift on the 3rd day, but that was it. Honestly, you were way too lenient on these guys. That's a serious position to be just dropping you in without the appropriate training. I would have gone a step further and reported them to the proper authorities. Someone needs to be properly trained in that position. You're handling emergencies. You can't afford to just be any old Joe. I went into an office for an interview. They said they had several positions available and I wanted to do some admin stuff. Well, after the interview, they told me to get into a van to do the next part of the process. Turns out we were driving an hour away so I could shadow one of their door-to-door salespeople. They would ask residents to go into their basement to check their hot water heaters to see if they were eligible to replace them with their company's own. I felt pretty uncomfortable about this, and pretty peeved that my whole day was gone doing this. The worst part was the girl I was shadowing spent half the day sitting around in the truck reading magazines, and just waiting for people to come home from work. I was sort of asking questions about the job and she got defensive and said, "Well, I decide if you get this job or not." To which I replied, "Yeah, I don't know if I want to do this." But she kept insisting that it was her who decided if I worked. I don't think she understood that I meant I don't want to do this crap, period. What a waste of a day. Yeah, a lot of companies like this have really sketchy hiring processes, where you think you're applying for one job and then you get dragged out to something like this. I'm sure a lot of people just get an Uber and go home at that point. Found out that the educational assistance they touted in their advertisement applied only to full-time employees, and that they both defined full-time as no fewer than 40 hours and kept anyone that would apply for that assistance from ever being qualified for it. None of this was advertised, and the people I interviewed with assured me, a college student, that working 21 hours a week would get me benefits. Too bad I read my contract before signing it and called them out. Don't lie to your employees, especially during an interview, on something that can be easily and swiftly disproven. If you're willing to lie to me about this, what else are you willing to lie to me about? Mine had to be when I was 18 and working at Blockbuster. I was helping the manager during the before open shift, getting new items stocked on the shelves that came in that morning. My mom called me and told me that my dad was having a heart attack, and she was panicking while waiting for the ambulance. Why did she call me at work to tell me this? The Blockbuster I worked at was in a strip mall type area behind my cul-de-sac. My house and the Blockbuster was separated by a small alley and a 3-minute walk. I told my manager what was happening and asked if I could leave to help my mom while they waited for the ambulance. She said no. I just stood there looking at her, thinking she couldn't be serious. I would be gone for all of 10 minutes and back helping her if needed. She stressed how important it was to get things done that needed to be done, and I could only leave if I called around to the other workers and found someone to come in and cover for me while I was gone. I took off my name tag, slammed it on the counter, and walked out. I never went back for any reason. For any who might wonder, my dad came out fine and was in the hospital for a few days. I was interviewing for a contract position at a very small game development company, and they told me that they were looking for someone to help finish up an existing project. Literally, the game looked like it was made in MS Paint, as if they had just hired some random guy off the street and asked them to make some art for them. Granted, it's a mobile game and sold for the standard 99 cents, so maybe that's not the worst. But the game itself doesn't look engaging at all either. But I figure, worst comes to worst, I could make some money on the side with some low effort. Then they told me that my pay would be a percentage of the sales. Noped right out of that one. I was pretty well qualified, but between jobs and receiving financial support, I get an interview with a small company. I'm looking forward to earning some money again. The boss/interviewer is a huge jerk. At one point, he asks me if I feel guilty that people like him are supporting me. I politely inform him that he'll have to support me a bit longer while I find a suitable job. I tell him that the interview is over, but thanks for your time. I went for a trial shift with a door-to-door sales company. The guy I was partnered up with told me that if he didn't make above the target sales, he was coming out with the equivalent of £3 per hour, which in the UK is well below minimum wage. This was a commission-only, self-employed role. Noped all the way home that day. Here's another example, guys. Just avoid that door-to-door stuff. It's never good for you as the worker. I worked in a bakery. It was my first day, so I get there in the morning to meet everyone. Then they have me grease up the baking trays for the others to fill. I lift up the first tray and like 10 to 15 cockroaches just scatter everywhere from under the tray. I tell the guy showing me the work that there were cockroaches, and he just shrugged. This was all in the back store. Customers were 10 feet away. So I tell the guy I'm not feeling too well after about an hour of doing that, and I head to the bathroom. When I come out, I told him I couldn't do that job, and he told me to get a real job then. So I left and got myself a proper job. I hope you called the health inspector too, 'cause that's just gross. I had an interview at what I thought was a regular steakhouse in a new town I had just moved to. The interview went well. It was just before the restaurant opened, so it was pretty empty. At the end, a waitress starting her shift walked by in buttless chaps and a thong. Turns out that was their uniform. The manager called like 30 minutes later saying I got the job. I had to politely decline that one. Back in college, I used to work part-time as a nanny. One summer, I landed a really sweet-sounding 40-hour-a-week Monday to Friday nannying job, looking after a baby and toddler. I was super excited about all the money I was going to make working that many hours. But the weird thing about this job was that the unemployed dad was also going to be at home with me. He was supposed to be spending all his time looking for a job, and I was watching after the kids while the wife was at work. Literally that first week, on day 2 or 3, he starts hinting about his marriage problems and how his wife sleeps on the couch. The next day, he asks me to try out his fancy new massage chair. I reluctantly agreed, and he just stared at me while I laid on this vibrating chair and was like, "Oh yeah, nice. Great, thanks." He then offered to give me an actual massage sometime, and maybe I wouldn't mind giving him one too. On Friday afternoon, I went home, told my parents who I was living with for the summer everything, and my mom called the guy and told him I wasn't coming back the following Monday, or ever. He then sent me a text message saying he was disappointed in me. Ugh, and his poor wife. This guy just sounds like a total creep. You definitely dodged a bullet on this one. It was my first day working for a family business that had just bought the equipment necessary to install underground fiber optic lines. They had previously been realtors, but had read an article in an entrepreneur's magazine that said $1 million a year gross was common. They pulled their 14 and 17-year-olds out of school to act as laborers, and the mom and dad were going to run separate crews. I was their first employee hire. As I was setting up my bore path, the mom told me we didn't need to expose an electrical line. We would just drill a few feet underneath it, and we didn't need to expose it. I told her that was ridiculous, reckless, and dangerous. The husband then came over and wanted to fight me for insulting his wife. And not 30 seconds into his tirade, the 14 and 17-year-old drilled directly into a large electrical line, which pops the transformer and sounds like an explosion. As I was walking away, the father went from wanting to fight me to chasing his 17-year-old around with a retention pond. The mom was begging me not to leave. Nope. I was unemployed for a couple months and started applying for pretty much any job I could do. This one was a basic small biz IT support contractor. The employee the interviewer introduced to me mouthed "run" when he turned his back. That was enough for me. Shout out to the employee though for giving you the warning. For me, it's when I was cold calling people about injury claims. Have you been injured in the past 3 years? That kind of thing. The thing that really irked me was that all of the people I called in those 20 minutes were polite, said they're not interested, and they were just sitting down for dinner. I quickly realized it was a horrible job, and I was in no way cut out for it. I left after 20 minutes and just walked out the door without a word. I went to my orientation at a boot factory. They're government contracted and so pay minimum wage. So I figured I'd work there a while and look for something better. After we do the usual paperwork signing and such, we're taken as a group onto the factory floor for a tour. It's hot, it's crowded, it stinks, and everyone working looks annoyed by our presence. Okay, I guess not everyone loves their job, right? No biggie. I'm sure this won't be so bad. Then our guide informs us in no uncertain terms that our coworkers quite often give new people bad information to get them in trouble or to make them mess up. They'd even be the ones to rat you out. Then we were told our foreman is the type to yell for no reason, ask people if they're drunk in an accusatory way for no reason, and is generally a giant jerk. I took a few moments to think after these last revelations and said, nah, and walked out of the building without a word to anyone. Screw that, Captain. I'm not putting up with all that for $8 and some change an hour. I work as a nanny, But when I first got into childcare, I was just babysitting. So it was my first night babysitting for this one family. Things went well, changed some diapers, put the baby to sleep, and that was about it. The parents come home and are very drunk. They asked me to stay for a little while after they got back, which was weird. Then they offered me, a 16-year-old at the time, a drink. Feeling a little pressured, I took it and just sipped on it. Then the mom got really close to me and says I probably shouldn't be driving home after having a drink. Once again, feeling a little pressured, I was thinking about accepting. So I asked if I'd just be sleeping on the couch. I'll never forget her next words to me. She says, "Oh no, honey, you'll be going to bed with us." I noped out of there so fast. I think I ran to my car, but it was just kind of a panicked blur. I left my purse there and everything. Second day at Rue 21, and the managers plus other coworkers all went out to lunch together and left me alone in the store. I wasn't able to ring anybody up yet, and the store was packed. I just walked out. When I was 16, I had an interview at a local pizza place in a not so good part of town. I was hired, and as I was walking out, two guys came in and robbed the place. The manager gave them the money in the register and they ran out. I looked at him and he said, "You get used to it." I never went back. Yeah, I don't blame you either. If it's that frequent of an occurrence, it's definitely not a safe place to be spending a lot of your time. I had a job in a salad plant, those bags of salad mix a lot of restaurants use. I was there for 2 weeks coring lettuce. In front of a conveyor belt, 8 hours a day, pick up a head, slam it, pull the core, put it down, next. You talk to your coworkers or you plot the downfall of Western civilization. One really sweet lady had been there for 10 years. 10 years on the lettuce line. She got called into the office and was gone for about a half an hour. She said, "I won't be here tomorrow, I got promoted." I asked what she'd be doing. Cabbage! I didn't quit. I wished her well, dropped my stuff, and walked out. I feel bad about not quitting, but I was young. And, well, 10 years. That was 28 years ago. Had I stayed, I might be up to carrots by now. I sometimes wonder how my life would have been different had I stayed. And in those moments, I celebrate every decision I've ever made. I was hired as an intern manager for a local nonprofit recycling plant. This meant I would hire and train interns for this amazing work opportunity. Turns out for them, interns meant working for free, doing basically everything for the organization event and marketing-wise, while also cleaning the bathroom and taking out the trash for the whole place every week. That's actually super illegal for being way too close to slave labor. I was on contract for minimum 6 months, but I managed to get out of it after 2. I ain't risking my career for their shady business practices. I wanted something part-time when I was at uni. I applied for a position at the local cinema chain and got an interview. It was one of those high turnover places that meant if you got an interview, there was a 95% chance you got a job. The guy at the box office radioed to his manager and was told to take me to room 7. We got to room 7 and wait. And wait, and wait. About 25 minutes pass before the manager starts screaming abuse over the radio because we're not in room 2. So off to room 2 we go on the other side of the building. It's a 15-screen cinema. The manager starts trying to turn on the charm, and I basically say if that's how you treat your employees in front of a job candidate, there's no way I'm ever working for you, and ask the other guy to show me out. I'm sure it made no difference to his behavior, but it saved me a lot of potential abuse. I worked at Claire's for 1 day. At the end of the shift, she asked me to put a bucket load of tiny earring packages back on the walls. A few hours later, I finish, and apparently misplaced a few of them. So she threw all of them on the floor and said to do it again. Nope. Sounds like she just has some kind of power trip. That was completely unnecessary. It was listed as a marketing position. The guy doing the interview started showing me and the other candidate how sharp Cutco knives are. Turns out it was a pyramid scheme. The guy kept asking if I wanted to sign on to buy some knives to sell. The other candidate went to the bathroom and never returned. I felt really awkward, also needed to wait to be picked up, so I stayed for the whole thing. I once saw a Craigslist ad for a stereo salesman. I showed up to a warehouse where a bunch of dudes got into a minivan. The owner told me to go on a run and see how it is, and then talk about the job. Turns out all these guys did was lie and con. They would go up to strangers and say, "Hey man, my cousin's got this stereo, but he got arrested and I don't need it. It's worth $500, but I'll gladly sell it for $200. Then use pushy tactics to get people to go to the ATM and give them money. The system was a piece of crap off-brand, and I overheard the owner saying in bulk it only cost him $20 to buy. Yeah, I noped out of this pretty quickly. I also called the police. JCPenney. I came to work to set up shelves and things, store technician, but my boss handed me a mop and said someone lady pooped in an aisle when she didn't get her way. I handed the mop back and said I'm not hazmat certified, but he is, and noped out of there. My first day on a carpentry job when I was 22, a 20-year-old kid shot me with a nail gun from about 20 feet away. He thought it was hilarious, and so did everyone else, including the company owner. I noped right out of there. Yeah, no kidding. And I hope you called the police, cause that could have been a very serious injury. Guys who married bridezillas, what happened after the wedding? My first wife was a bridezilla. During our honeymoon, she realized she was married and the wedding day was history. She wanted the big wedding, which she had, not the actual marriage. The next 2 years were miserable until she finally tapped out. I was young and stupid, and the thought of divorce never crossed my mind. I don't know why it didn't. I guess I just assumed I'd be miserable the rest of my life. When she told me she was leaving, it felt as if the weight of the world was off of my shoulders. On a happy note, her parents were still paying off the wedding when we divorced. That's what happens when you allow your daughter everything she wanted, including 2 wedding dresses. I have a feeling this is how a lot of these stories are gonna go. They wanted the big wedding, and then once it's over, they realize they don't really care so much anymore. One of my coworkers married a bridezilla. I'll try to just hit the bullet points of what happened leading up to, during, and after the wedding, but it's still a lot. The moment he proposed, she lost any interest in any woohoo. According to him, she also basically stopped acting like the woman he fell in love with and started acting like her real self, which was completely crazy. A week after he proposed, she quit her job because her full-time job was now planning the wedding. The wedding was horrible, but I'm getting there. She had a fight with his mother because the bride demanded the groom's mom pay for half the wedding, but get zero input, and wasn't allowed to contribute to the guest list, which was 95% the bride's friends and family. The bride, who was 30 years old, subsequently egged her future mother-in-law's house. When the bride and groom had a fight about the egging, he went to work the next day and she shaved her head and sent him a video of her screaming and sobbing as she buzzed her hair off in the bathroom. I worked with him. He showed me the video when he said he had to leave. I strongly urged him to have her assessed by a psychiatrist. Jump to the wedding. It was in a pool clubhouse in the summer. It was way too small for the 150 plus people they invited. Someone forgot to turn the AC on until after the place was packed. A lifeguard showed up in a swimsuit to turn it on, but it did little given it was already sweltering. 2 rows of chairs in the clubhouse were ribboned off with reserved signs on them, so no one sat in them. They were later occupied by the 6 seated bridesmaids, leaving about a dozen open chairs once the wedding started. The one groomsman stood by the groom and didn't sit. Elderly people were left standing or reduced to sitting on the floor, as there was no way to get to the chairs once the ceremony started. The bride showed up 90 minutes late, having been unhappy with her hair, which I assume was a wig, and makeup, so she took it all off and did it herself. So all the guests are standing there for an hour and a half waiting for her. The groom was literally standing at the altar sweating his butt off in a wool suit in the South's high summer, and was clearly not sure if she would show up. He looked like he felt sick. When the bride showed up, she burst into the clubhouse, marched down the aisle, and snapped at the officiant to hurry up and get started. During the prayer, while the religious groom had his head bowed, she turned to wave at everyone. I don't pray, so I was looking up. Then she told her mother to go get her some water. She drank a bottle of water during the prayer and kept grinning and waving at people in attendance, paying zero mind to her groom in front of her. When the ceremony was over, tables were crammed into the clubhouse, and apparently only family and immediate friends of the bride had seats at tables. The rest of us were going to be standing outside during the reception, so I didn't see a dance, a speech, the cake cut, nothing. The food was served outside in the southern US July heat, with bugs everywhere. The bride made the groom go get her food over and over. He meekly stood in line with the other 150 people, until people insisted he go sit and let them get the food. Nope, she told him to get the food, so he said he had to be the one to get her food. She never left her table, never greeted any of her guests. Apparently, they had a massive fight as they were leaving the following day for the honeymoon. The bride laying all the failures of the wedding she planned at him and his mom's feet. She threw his luggage out of the car and tried to drive to the airport by herself, but he had their tickets and jumped on the hood to stop her from driving off in his car. He got fired about a month after the wedding because he kept showing up late, leaving early, and leaving in the middle of the day, usually because she called him with some crisis. 1 year after the wedding, I got a thank you note for my wedding gift, which was signed by just the bride with a note that said, "As you may have heard, Ryan and I have had a bumpy start in our first year as a married couple, and we're separated now. Thanks for the lovely gift." They divorced a couple months later. You know, I know what I was getting into with this thread, but I can't help but just feel bad for all these guys. I married a Groomzilla, bent over backwards to make the wedding as magical as he wanted. I would have been happy in someone's backyard with a potluck. He admitted in couples counseling 7 years later that he never really wanted to marry me, so much as he just wanted a huge show and party. Everyone liked and approved of me, so he wanted them all to see he was making a good choice and be envious. He wanted them to be proud of him. We used up most of the money I got from a car accident settlement. Could have put a down payment on a small house. He asked for a divorce in 2020. They had an expensive $75,000 wedding. After they split up, it turned out the bride never turned in the paperwork to make their marriage legal. The groom didn't even know he wasn't married until he wanted to file for divorce. The bride never returned the gifts either, even though they never really got married. She just lied to everyone about it. I don't know how many people know she never got married. This sounds like it would be illegal in some way, no? My brother married a bridezilla. She yelled at my mother on the day of for asking her where she wanted certain decorations at the reception site. There wasn't a written plan, so my mom had nothing to go off of. Never thanked my parents for financially contributing to the wedding. Accused a bridesmaid of trying to upstage her by getting a spray tan before the wedding. My brother wanted me to be in the wedding party, but she told him to his face that I was too pretty to be in the wedding party and all of her bridesmaids had to be less attractive than her. She stole my sister-in-law's jacket in the middle of the reception. Literally took it right off her back, because one of the bridesmaids was cold. It was a night reception in the spring. The girl should have brought a jacket. The list goes on. Well, they got divorced about a year later because apparently her demanding attitude carried over into the marriage. Needless to say, the rest of my family had a little party when we heard about the divorce. She sounds like a piece of work, but is there literally any compliment more objectively true than being told you're too attractive for the wedding party by a vapid narcissist? Not a bridezilla, but a groomzilla. A friend of my father was remarrying. It was both his and his bride's second time around, both in their early 40s, and an arranged marriage. The guy was an utter groomzilla. He demanded that everything be at top-notch hotels with obscenely expensive catering and hired string quartets and whatnot for the entertainment. Mostly paid out of the bride's family's pocket, I might add. The parties on the night leading up to the main wedding event were opportunity enough for him to make a rather public fool of himself, talking at the top of his voice and showboating the entire time. But the kicker came the next day, when the bride was missing from her own wedding reception. Obviously, it was very odd and conspicuous, and the few relatives from her side made some non-committal excuses for her not feeling well. Turns out, this jerk had divorced the poor woman right after he'd had his wedding night fun. He said that he didn't like her enough, and that's an almost literal quote. So he gave her the divorce papers and that was it. The marriage was officially over before the festivities even ended. That's gotta be close to a record turnaround time, right? But seriously, that guy is a massive jerk. My cousin was married to one. He comes from a very not wealthy area and has become successful himself after moving out of his hometown. His wife was extremely wealthy, even could say excessively. They married after a year of knowing each other, and boy was it a surprise to hear about the wedding plans. They spent over $250,000 on the wedding, including catering by 5 to 7 different restaurants. Their food was from different cultures and cooked in front of you. Think almost hibachi buffet style. They even had servers in tailed suits and white gloves serving Taco Bell after midnight once everyone was drunk. Once they got married, she was spending more money than he could make. She was getting mad because he wasn't making enough, while she wasn't working and they hadn't had any kids. They got divorced, and she gave him the ultimatum of getting his ring back or keeping the dog. He kept the dog. Her sister, a lawyer, helped her file a restraining order on him, and they haven't spoken since. Screw her, but man did he dodge a bullet. $250,000 is an insane amount of money for a wedding. Our guy made the right decision keeping the dog, though. I married a Groomzilla. We're talking costume changes between wedding and reception, yelling at the wedding planner, dragged out fights about whether we can add fruit kebabs so people would get enough to eat, everything. There was zero compromise. He made a lot of promises for things I had been wanting after the wedding, and they never materialized, like a beach vacation and such. Turns out, no compromise at the wedding meant no compromise anywhere else, so I left him after 4 years of marriage. Best decision ever. No compromise at the wedding meant no compromise anywhere else is probably about the best way you could sum up this entire thread. A friend of my husband's, who he's known since they were kids, so about 20 years now, married a bridezilla. She's evangelical and religion is pretty much her life, and he was agnostic, a nice metalhead geek guy. They asked us to be the best man and woman. Me and my husband are both tattooed, and when we arrived at the wedding, we were his only friends. Everyone in that big wedding was from her, now also his, church. Well, the preacher kept saying to him he had his old life and now his new life, his old friends and now the new friends, yada yada yada. But all the time criticizing his old ways, the authentic way. And everyone kept looking at me and my husband like we were beasts. Worst day ever. She's that kind of person that wants to be an influencer. Every single thing is in her Instagram. Their relationship seems perfect there, but he always seems so unhappy, so apathetic, especially when we used to see him. Always talking about how things are so different, how things are like she wants. Her stories are basically her saying he does nothing right. It's even humiliating. She made him stop talking to us. This last week, he got out of every group we had. He stopped answering my husband, who's very sad that he lost one of his friends. I believe she's the one replying with the few weird messages he does get. That's the bridezilla. It seems very common for the bridezilla to act on social media, but in real life, it's all messy. It honestly sounds like these two were very different from each other when they got married. Like, these two lifestyles don't really mesh together. I feel like he must have known he was going to be giving everything up to marry her. My girlfriend of 10 years is very down to earth and level-headed. We finally decided to get married later this year for a few reasons, and she's feeling a lot of phantom pressure to do things a certain way. It's not like there's an overbearing mom or catty friends applying pressure or expectations. It's just the whole idea is overwhelming and filled to the brim with opportunities to make a decision you might end up regretting later or forever. I've taken a more active role in narrowing down options instead of asking her to pick a perfect solution out of 5 million possible options. It's helped somewhat, but there's still a lot of pressure on her, seemingly out of nowhere, to make a series of decisions that all depend on the first few big decisions that are weighing heavily on us. All this to say, I can see how this kind of stuff could turn a normal woman into a lunatic. These types of events tend to bring latent family and friend drama to the forefront, and emotions are high before anything even really gets started. My guess is that a lot of bridezillas were actually lovely people who calmed down and returned to being lovely people after the stress of wedding stuff is removed. This is the other side of the coin. Planning a wedding does have a lot involved, and there are a lot of general expectations. It's understandable how a normal person could get overwhelmed. Before reading these comments, I thought a bridezilla was a woman huge and strong enough to be compared to Godzilla, and entered the thread eagerly expecting to read stories about grooms getting lifted and carried off into the sunset on their wedding day. I'm very disappointed. My uncle married one. She had a spending problem, went clubbing in her 40s thinking she was 20, acted like she was better than everyone, couldn't keep friendships, and cheated on my uncle with a man 10 to 15 years her junior. My uncle is remarried and happy now. Sounds like she never quite grew up and just wanted to live her life as a party. That's definitely a red flag. Been married 14 years now. She's definitely a pain in the butt sometimes, but so is everyone else. I'm also pretty laid back, so a lot of decisions I leave to her because I just don't care. If it's a decision I do care about, I make the decision. Without her, I wouldn't have the 3 best kids on earth. She's an amazing mom, and our kids have our best qualities. We have fun all the time. I think she was a bridezilla not because she was a crazy person. It was more about making the moment right for everyone and making it a great memory. She had a relatively rough life with her parents, and there weren't a ton of great memories. I noticed she goes way out of her way to make great memories for the kids, as she's always planning stuff for us to do with them. I'm gonna keep her. I married a bridezilla. In the 18 months we were married, she was such an unfit mother with too many instances to list here that when the divorce was finalized, I got custody of our kid and the kid she had prior to our marriage. Also, she was a blackout drunk and cheated on me with several different men. The final straw was when I had to travel out of state to check on my grandmother. I came back a day early, saw used Marlboros in the ashtray, not her brand, and I don't smoke, and then I heard grunting and groaning in the bedroom. Yep, there she was, and there he was, and there he was. Devil's Triangle. I contacted a divorce lawyer the next day, finalized it as fast as possible. Ding ding ding, we have a winner. My uncle married this lady who was an insane bridezilla and put him into an enormous amount of debt because she wouldn't settle for anything less than her perfect dream wedding. She had the marriage annulled after the fancy honeymoon and said she didn't want to be his wife, but she always wanted to have her dream wedding. Jerk. My cousin was an unbelievable bridezilla. About a year after their horrifying wedding, her husband convinced her to seek help for her mental health. 5 years later, she's in a much better place and they're happy. Just in case anyone wanted a happy story. My girlfriend's former friend was a bridezilla. Didn't smile once at her own wedding because she was too busy freaking out over insignificant details. Although she has a master's degree with unpaid college loans, she's now a permanent stay-at-home mom, an anti-vaxxer, and a conspiracy theorist. She spends her days getting into Facebook beefs with anyone who isn't woke enough. No idea how her husband hasn't gone crazy, cause as far as I know, he's not into any of that. She sounds like exactly the type of person you would expect a stereotypical bridezilla to be. My sister decided to marry a fellow she'd been with for less than 4 months. Second marriage. It was spur of the moment, with less than 1 month notice. Let's all fly across Canada for a lovely East Coast wedding. Flying across Canada is expensive. Anyways, I had just started a new job and it was imperative that I be there at work during her wedding time. Not the slightest option of time off. I would have been let go. She didn't talk to me for over a year. The marriage lasted around a year, if that. She took him for everything. He lost his house, his car, and drank himself out of his job. She even took his dog. Other family members stepped in and gave him his dog back. She's a peach. Single if anyone's looking. My first marriage was to a bridezilla. She got drunk before the ceremony and wouldn't dance because she was too anxious people would make fun of her. She tried bragging to my cousins during the dinner that our wedding was better than theirs. The 4 of us got married in a 2-year span. She invited her ex-boyfriend to the ceremony that I later found out she had been sleeping with both before and after our wedding. She took the money we'd received as gifts and were planning on using for a house down payment and spent it on random crap. She had a ton of debt that she kept from me as well. I left her a year after to the day and never looked back. I'm now happily married to a great woman. Obviously, hindsight, yada yada, but there were a lot of red flags I should have noticed. Here are some of the big things she did after the wedding. She spent money quicker than she could make it. I ended up having to take on a second job, and I already worked 50+ hours a week, all just to cover the bills. She started using substances and stopped going to work. She would visit her friends in the evening. Found out later on she was going to her boyfriend's. The final straw was when I found out what she was doing with the money. I didn't know at first she was into substances. Online payment of bills weren't as popular when we were married, so I would give her the money to go and pay some during banking hours. One day, I got pulled over and charged with no insurance on my vehicle. Turns out she was taking the money for bills and buying substances. When the notices for no payment would come in the mail, she would hide them or rip them up. I handed her the separation papers on our 1-year anniversary. I, 21-year-old female at the time, married a Groomzilla, 25. I wanted to elope because I didn't like the idea of being stared at by people. He demanded a wedding of 200+. He had my parents build a giant gazebo on our farm. Said he'd help pay for building costs. Me and my dad built it by hand with our neighbor. He was always working. Don't get me wrong, he helped a few weekends, but it was a year-long project. Shortly after the wedding, we retired to our hotel, and he didn't want to consummate. I was like, okay, long day, I get it. 3 months into a sexless marriage, I walk into him banging our 60-ish-year-old male neighbor. I opened my bedroom door, saw what was happening, said I was sorry, shut the door, got my dog, and drove home to mommy and daddy a state away. Why did I say I was sorry and not yell? I'll never know. Doctors of Reddit, what's the biggest case of faking it you've ever seen? Taking trauma call during surgery residency, I had a prisoner come in after a fight and claimed he couldn't move or feel his legs. All the CT scans and MRIs were normal, but we would shield his legs so he couldn't see them and poke them with needles and other sharp objects with enough force to cause pain. He never flinched or moved his legs at all. He was diagnosed with SIWORA, which stands for spinal cord injury without radiographic abnormality. He stayed in the hospital for a week. No improvement. Always had one guard with him. One night, they were down in the lobby watching some television, but the guard needed to use the restroom. The patient said, "Where could I possibly go? I'm paralyzed." The guard left him alone for 2 minutes. The patient was last seen sprinting down the road, naked butt cheeks flapping in the breeze. Made it to a city 4 hours away by car before he was caught again. I've never seen anyone fake it so well. Truly playing the long con. Yeah, this guy had a plan and he was seeing it through to the end. Dermatologist here. Patient was convinced she had a melanoma and needed a biopsy and would need to be on workers' comp. I told her it looked like ink from a marker. She demanded a biopsy. I wiped the area off with an alcohol swab and showed her the ink and that there was no spot on her skin anymore. She stormed out threatening to sue. I'm just glad I cured her melanoma. You truly are a miracle worker, doc. Had a patient come in for a fall who now couldn't move their legs at all. Did a bunch of tests and didn't find anything. The patient was not at all fazed by suddenly being paralyzed, which was the first red flag. Didn't really believe anything was wrong, but the patient was still not moving their legs. My options are to admit for a huge workup or get them to walk. So I update them saying everything is fine, tests are negative, you can go home. Patient gets up, gets dressed, and walks out without a word. So we're not even going to acknowledge the fact that you just completely lied? Not a doctor, but I worked in healthcare for nearly 20 years. While taking a break from the ICU due to it being emotionally draining, I worked in home health for a bit. I had a patient who clearly had Munchausen syndrome. On a daily basis, she would call her insurance to see what things would be covered if she was diagnosed with this or that. She called her doctor's office an average of 5 times during my shift with her. She would report all kinds of non-real symptoms. She pestered the doctors into doing an exploitive laparoscopic surgery. Of course, nothing was found. One day, I walked in and she was rubbing her incisions with rotten cabbage, trying to get it infected. She wasn't seeking pain meds, except to sell. Really, she was just as happy with antibiotics or stool softeners. Anything. As long as they wrote her a prescription and she got to go to the pharmacy where she did a whole song and dance for them too, claiming allergies and reactions. She always increased the exaggeration of her story too. One time, she fluttered her eyes after making sure I was looking and said she lost consciousness in that half a second. She called the doctor and claimed she lost consciousness for 5 minutes. She called the insurance and claimed it was 10 minutes. She called the pharmacy and claimed it was 30 minutes. Then she called 911 and told them she woke up on the floor after losing consciousness for 4 hours. The worst thing about her was she was a mom. Her son was 28 at the time, and by all the stories of his childhood illnesses and her saying how he's severely disabled, I knew she basically screwed up his childhood with Munchausen by proxy. She portrayed him as being severely disabled, and that's why he would never find a wife. I met him. He was healthy and of average intelligence. He wasn't looking for a wife. He was gay, but she refused to accept that. Working with her was so miserable that I took a couple years off from any and all healthcare after that. No, I don't blame you. It sounds like you paid your dues with this woman for a while. We had a patient faking a seizure, so my supervisor told one of us to get the brain needle. The patient made a miraculous and swift recovery without intervention. A young woman, maybe around 18 to 20 years old, went running into a small rural hospital ER pretending to have abdominal pain. Police officer had tagged her going 40+ kilometers over the speed limit, which was stunt driving as per the new law in Ontario. Impound and license suspension automatic. Cop followed her into the ER and apparently said he'd be waiting for her when she left. Locum staff, such as myself, were housed at a small B&B about 15 minutes away, and the ER had pre-printed orders set to be done before we arrived. When I arrived, she flat out admitted that she just came in because she freaked out and didn't stop. I told her we'd give her 45 minutes to call her parents or family before I booted her. Except BHCG came back positive, and subsequent ultrasounds came back showing extremely early ectopic. The officer figures out something's up when he hears an air ambulance call come in over the radio. She was completely asymptomatic and just worked out that she dodged both charges and a life-threatening issue by accident. It was definitely a WTF moment. She's incredibly lucky she ran away from the police. You don't get to say that often. Pediatric neuropsychologist here. Got a referral for more or less consolidation care. Patient was 13, wheelchair bound, required therapeutic oxygen, seizures, arthritis, musculoskeletal problems, suspected autism, completely nonverbal, severe behavior challenges, the list goes on. He was being followed by at least 8 different specialities. Clearly, none of whom were communicating with each other, and the med list was around 18 prescriptions long, including some incredibly heavy-duty stuff. Opioids, antipsychotics, antiepileptics, that sort of stuff. Got kicked to me after his upteenth ER trip because the ER doctor felt something was off, and he needed someone to look at the whole picture. Factitious disorder by caregiver or Munchausen by proxy. All of the original symptoms were parent-reported, going back to about a year old. It possibly started with a fever-induced seizure in infancy, but this was never witnessed by anyone but mom. She's been telling docs different things. She was convinced her son had all these disorders, told him he was gonna die any day. He got a Make-A-Wish trip, donations, all kinds of things. He was removed from her custody and taken off most of his meds. Within a few weeks, he was out of the wheelchair, playing basketball, no oxygen, super talkative and friendly, and no behavior problems. He did have a pretty significant intellectual disability, but there's no way to say if that was organic or the result of the prescription cocktail he had been fed all his life. Hopefully, with some good therapy and a stable home, he can continue to make progress. Some parents just really know how to mess up their kids. Physical therapist here. Working mom comes into the clinic with her infant in a stroller. She's limping like she's got a nail in her foot, wincing in pain and tears in her eyes. She's crying during her visit with the PT. None of us think she's faking it. She limped out of the clinic. I glanced out of the window and saw this woman bounding down the sidewalk, hips swaying, full stride, going places. We were all fools. I guess she was just there for painkillers or something? Whenever we had kids, usually teenagers, playing up their symptoms to extend their hospital stay, we would order them into a healthy lifestyle. Lights out at 9, no screen time for 2 hours before bed, healthy diet chock full of fruits and vegetables, screen time limits, minimum number of laps around the unit per day to get in their exercise. They got better so much faster with our healthy lifestyle tips. My brother was an EMT for 2 years, and he told me this. People will try to use the ambulance as a means for transportation from Fulton to Oswego because the hospital's in Oswego by faking seizures. Sometimes when the head EMT guy was feeling fun and knew the person was faking, he'd say something like, "Man, it's weird that he's having seizures but not peeing himself." Apparently, the person would kind of snap out of it for a second, weigh up the repercussions, then either pee themselves or stop faking. I thought that was hilarious. Sorta along the same idea. Working at a pharmacy, we saw a guy come in to try and get a refill on some pain meds that had no refill. After pleading that his ear really hurt, we told him again we couldn't refill it. One of the other employees saw him step into a side hallway, take a pencil, and jam it forcefully into his ear repeatedly, drawing blood. He calmly left and went to the ER. He came back a few hours later with a prescription for pain meds. Oh, this one really bothers me. This isn't faking. This dude has an addiction and apparently will do whatever it takes to get his pain meds. This patient comes in for back pain with weakness of the legs, gets a full workup with MRI, standard blood work, and then some immunological things to look for stuff like myasthenia gravis. No neurological or immunological explanation for the weakness. Patient is seen by physical therapy and they're of the opinion that the patient is holding back intentionally. Go to see the patient at the end of the day and prep them for discharge. Patient is infuriated that they're being discharged, yelling and screaming about how they aren't better, how they're disappointed in the institution, and blah blah blah. They said one particular thing that still clearly stands out 3 to 4 years later.
I can't believe you're sending me home already. I haven't even told my family I'm here, and now you're gonna send me home before they even have the chance to see me?
My attending and I leave the room to arrange things with the nurses. We go back in and the patient is out of bed and standing up in the middle of the room. Miraculously, the patient is able to walk with zero assistance, when they had so much difficulty walking with assistance over the past 2 days. At that point, they were enraged we went in the room without knocking. They were discharged home after having a conversation regarding abuse of medical services. Had a patient when I was an intern feigning blindness. She would constantly be playing on her smartphone, only furiously trying to hide it when someone from the care team came into her room. The best was when my attending one day strolled past her room and threw his hand up in a highly exaggerated hello wave. She started to throw her arm up too, but caught herself halfway through, then threw her hand back in her lap and pretended to be staring off into nothing. Nurse for an ophthalmologist here. Had a 21-year-old new patient claiming to be completely blind from a sudden and severe glaucoma diagnosis from a previous unknown doctor. Would feel around while walking, tried to keep his eyes rolled back into his head, the whole 9 yards. He said he's a famous YouTube rapper that's now unable to make videos or earn a living. I exclaimed to have heard him before, and very excitedly asked him to search and show me his YouTube channel on my phone so that I could subscribe. He took my phone out of my hand and effortlessly found the YouTube app and typed away in the search bar. Oh, and of course his eyes were back to normal and focused. Come on, man, you're gonna fall for that? One time my roommate, who's an ICU nurse, came to see one of my indoor soccer games. During the game, a player on the other team went down hurt and started screaming in pain and swearing and rolling around while holding his ankle, before he eventually was helped off the field. He then limped over to where the fans sat and watched the rest of the game brooding in silence before he left early. After the game, my roommate told me he was going to go over and see if there was anything he could do to help, until he saw that the guy was limping on the wrong leg. How did no one else notice this? Only the nurse caught on to the fact that the guy's limping on the foot that he hurt? Was told this one by a fellow nurse I used to work with when we had a psych floor. It's not unusual for psych patients to stash things in various orifices. This one woman was convinced she was impregnated by a ghost-like figure, but no one would believe her. So one day, she started complaining of massive pelvic and uterine pain. She called them contractions. So the doctor goes to do an exam. The doctor feels something larger in there, so they prep a table to get the object out, which was quite large. So the wonderful third year helping with the procedure starts hearing this woman complain of contractions and yelling things like, "Should I push? I'm gonna start pushing!" The doctor is trying to work forceps around this woman's parts as to not hurt her. Finally goes, "Got," and as he starts saying it, pulls out a baby doll, head only. The poor med student did the wobble, went all flush, and had problems keeping balance and about took a dive. I was told he didn't live that down the whole rotation. I mean, I don't blame the poor kid. In his mind, he just saw a baby's head get ripped off. I once saw a patient who had been faking paralysis of the legs for years, used a wheelchair, and never walked. Old records showed extensive imaging, neurology consults, and other tests that proved the patient had full function of all his extremities. Family and friends were just going along with it, not sure if it was really conversion disorder or if the patient had some secondary gain issue. Not a doctor, but am a UK-based midwife. Had a patient who had been in and out of hospital throughout her pregnancy with episodes of heavy bleeding. This was her 6th baby, so she was a fairly well-known patient in our unit. The issue was no one had ever seen her actively bleeding. She'd call saying that she had bled down the toilet but flushed it. All the examinations we did came back completely normal with mostly no evidence of any bleeding whatsoever. On occasion, during spectrum examinations, we'd see the smallest amount of blood. I was caring for her during a shift where she yet again called to say she was bleeding. I walked into her room and found her jabbing her private area with a sharp object to make herself bleed. She'd been doing it the entire pregnancy. The reason she gave? Because she had 5 noisy children at home, she needed some rest, and knew we wouldn't admit her to the hospital if it wasn't for a good reason. She would do it any time her being discharged home was mentioned. We ended up having to complete a prenatal mental health referral and consult with the safeguarding midwives, as she was putting herself and the baby at risk of serious harm. I understand needing to get away from the kids for a little bit, but this is an extreme. Ophthalmology technician. People pretend to be blind all the time. I go to check their eye pressure with the Tono pen, a device you poke them directly in the eye with, and they go, "What the heck is that thing?" I'm a nurse. We had a guy who had to come in every 3 months to get a medical certificate to say he couldn't work at his retail job due to severe disabling back pain. He was receiving large amounts of insurance money for this condition. After the doctor had done his usual examinations and questions and signed it off, the guy asks the doctor to check his shoulder, which doc does and asks how he injured it. The guy says playing rugby for a competitive team. "Really?" says the doc. "How long have you been playing for them?" Guy's been playing and training the whole time. Doc puts this info on the insurance form. The doc lost it in the staff room laughing. Next week, the patient loses his mind in reception because his insurance has been cancelled. You kinda brought this one on yourself, my friend. Back when I was a nurse, a guy came into the ER for a stomachache. When asking him about history, he randomly mentions a fight with his girlfriend where she left in a tizzy and he fell asleep on the couch. 20 minutes later, when we see the CT, he has a satellite cable remote wrapped in a condom lodged in his rectum. I'm guessing he was intending to frame her. I didn't get to hear the conversation he had with the doctor. I was curious how he was going to explain why she was nice enough to wrap it in the condom. This has gotta be one of the stupidest plans I've ever heard. I'm a nurse, not a doctor. I had a patient who worked in a hospital as a janitor, so he knew enough to fake a bit. He was seeking pain meds, complaining of chest pain and wanting morphine. He was worked up for everything cardiac and was fine. Then he tried to claim GI discomfort when he was being discharged. Cleared again for everything. So he faked chest pain again. Cleared again. Now he's my patient. I'm a new face. He tells me he's having abdominal pain. I call the doctor, knowing this guy's history. He says he'll be up to see him soon. This patient wants a ginger ale, some stomachache. I decided to go to lunch. My coworker comes into the lunchroom disgusted. This guy had taken a dump in a basin and then dumped the ginger ale over it and tried to tell her he had fecal vomiting. He obviously needed meds right now for the pain. I walk into his room and sure enough, a pile of poop in a puddle of ginger ale. I told him I'd have to take away his food and drinks and we'd have to put an NG down. Suddenly, he changed his tune. He admitted to faking it. Why do these people do what they do? ER nurse here. I was bringing a patient back to a room who said he had kidney stones. I had him stop at the bathroom and get a urine sample. Dude comes out with the specimen cup that literally has a piece of concrete in it. Looked him in the eye expecting some sort of joke. He was serious. I threw it away and walked this foolish man back to the waiting room to contemplate his stupidity. When I was a medical student, I worked in the pediatric side of the emergency room, and we would give popsicles to all the kids. One afternoon, an 8-year-old came in with his father, and I asked what was wrong. The kid couldn't remember what he had complained about to his dad, and the dad couldn't remember why he brought his kid in. The kid's mom was a nurse, and she worked at another hospital at the time, but she was the one that would keep track of all these things. Anyway, after a few minutes trying to figure out what was going on, the kid asked, "So can I have my popsicle now?" The kid was 100% healthy. Unfortunately, we reinforced bad behavior and both the kid and the dad subsequently left with popsicles. Years ago, I had a patient who had been rear-ended in an auto accident a few weeks before I saw her. She had a history of lupus. She was decked out in the usual I'm crippled paraphernalia. Crutches, neck brace, elbow braces, wrist braces, knee braces, all of it. And she could barely walk. I saw her a couple of times and she showed no improvement. One Saturday I was on call but had to take a backstreets route to the hospital because of an event taking place on the main thoroughfare. I apparently drove around her neighborhood because, wonders behold, she was wearing old lady spandex power walking down the sidewalk, holding weights in both hands. I didn't call her out. Next week, she was back at the clinic with her I'm crippled get up on again. A few weeks later, I got a subpoena for the deposition, and it all became clear. I'm a surgery resident. When I was on my trauma rotation, we had a patient come in after MVC with question that maybe the patient had seized and that had caused the accident. So he's in the trauma bay and starts shaking. The trauma nurse goes, "Oh, this isn't a real seizure." And the patient stops shaking, sits up, turns to the nurse and yells, "You don't know a thing about me." Prisoner came in with signs and symptoms of a big stroke. At that time, the protocol was to get a non-contrast head CT to rule out a bleed, and then give TPA, a powerful clot-busting drug that's only worth the risk if the benefit is to mitigate a major stroke. So that's what happened. Later in the course, he got a little carried away and started embellishing his story with symptoms that didn't make sense with his stroke diagnosis. And that's how we figured out he was faking it just to get some time away from jail. Can't say I blame him. At least he wasn't trying to escape. He just wanted to get out for a day, it sounds like. Massage therapists of Reddit, what are some of your most awkward or disgusting experiences with clients? Tell me all the weird crap you've dealt with. Then tell me if it's worth it making this career choice. My mother's been a massage therapist for over 20 years. She's in her 50s and she loves it. She massages a lot of elderly people and doesn't mind. She massages a few obese people and doesn't mind. To her, people are people, and she's not easily disgusted. But when people proposition her for sex, she minds. One particularly troubling encounter was when she was massaging a friend's husband, and he thought it would be appropriate to ask for sexual favors. I hope she went and told her friend about that afterwards, cause I'm sure she'd want to know. I had a very eccentric client, which is a nice way of saying creepy. They came into our clinic one day wanting a tui na massage. It's a type of Chinese massage. We usually leave the room to let the client strip down into their underwear before we commence. But with this guy, I had no chance to get away. Before I had time to give him a towel, he dropped his pants to reveal a sparkling blue G-string that barely kept everything in place. The guy was about 58, huge beer gut, gray hair, gold earring, and hairy like Robin Williams. As I started the massage, the guy started to tell me that he worked as an erotic masseuse specializing in body slide massage. This is where the masseuse gets oiled up and rubs his body and genitals all over before screwing the client at the end. The whole time I was massaging him, he kept telling me that I was really good with my hands. He also repeatedly told me how he was good at his job and plugging his business with a hinting tone. It was a very awkward session. Yeah, not the kind of job offer you want while working. I was getting a massage last week, and in the little room next to mine, there was a talkative older gentleman. He was chatting away to his massage therapist. Then it went quiet. After a little while, I heard him whisper, Do you do this for everyone? A large female client wanted focus on her glutes. Needless to say, I was farted on while she was asleep. Her own fart woke her up, and then she accused me of farting because there were trace amounts of fart still in the air. I'm sure it wasn't pleasant at the time, but now you have a funny story to tell. I've had clients ask if they could massage me, specifically my butt, while I was working on them. One woman tried to put her face in my crotch and told me she would love to lick me. For the record, I was wearing yoga pants as I'm also a yoga instructor. Many people are surprised at how strong I am and comment on it and how small my hands are. That's not odd. What was odd was the guy who followed that observation with telling me that I also had
moved like a wolverine.
Not sure if that's a good or a bad thing. Former massage therapist here. I used to work in the YMCA in my hometown. There was a group of 4 older ladies around their early 50s that all played tennis together, and afterwards took turns getting massaged. At first, it was great. They were mostly doctors' wives, fairly easygoing and generous tippers to boot. But then things took a strange turn. One woman offered me a diamond tennis bracelet if I agreed to switch the order they were massaged in and did her first. I declined the gift but promised to use a rotating schedule in the future. She was fine at first, but slowly became more aggressive. She would beg and bribe me to extend her half hour for 10 or 15 minutes, in spite of her friends waiting. She constantly offered me expensive presents, shopping, home-cooked meals, all kinds of things I was uncomfortable accepting. The more I declined her offers, the weirder and edgier she seemed to get around me. Finally, I guess she got tired of beating around the bush and made an outright advance by grabbing my hand and forcing it onto her breast. I told her I was very flattered, but I wasn't interested in other women this way. She screamed, perfectly in range of all her friends and my coworkers to hear, about how I'd been leading her on for months, and how I didn't deserve any of her time and money. She berated my appearance and education before storming out the door naked and furious. I quit that day, started waiting tables, and never quite worked up the nerve to go back. Sounds like this woman was a little more invested in your relationship than you were. My mom is a massage therapist. She used to work out of our house. She had a studio downstairs where she would have people over for massages. One day, a woman who came over was probably in her late 60s. Oldish, slightly overweight woman. Now, my mom, as is standard procedure, asks this woman to disrobe and get under the covers while my mom waited outside. When she came back in after a few minutes after asking if the woman was done, the woman was standing in the middle of the room completely naked. The woman said, "Honey, I'm sure you've seen more than this in your day." She had not. That's not right. You're intentionally putting your masseuse in an uncomfortable situation. I'm sure they don't want to see any of their clients naked. I do it and I love it. I'm a guy, and I have to say there are some creepy phone calls, but that's about as bad as it gets. One guy asked exactly what kind of massage I did, which is a common precursor to "do you do extras?" And I clearly told him about Swedish massage. He said, "That's something my partner and I would be interested in," and asked, "And for the ladies, do you do sensual massage?" I find this euphemism so frustrating. It literally doesn't imply what they want to imply, but it's become recognized as a word for sexy time. I said no. He then said, "Could you?" I said, "No." Then follows a common awkward situation where we try and both pretend that he hasn't just asked me for some kind of sexual service in return for money, and finish the conversation as you might otherwise. This conversation and the time a rather lonely elderly gay man told me how much he appreciated having a pretty man take care of him were about the weirdest moments. Admittedly, when Mr. Lonely Gay Guy said that to me, I felt a bit gross, but also internally giggled, blushed, and said, "Aw, he thinks I'm pretty." For a fleeting moment, I considered a life as a wealthy boy toy of an aging thespian. My ticket into the high society of homosexual retirees. Feeling slightly jaded and ashamed of my life built on lies and sexual quid pro quo, but driven by the idea of inheriting his immaculate house and fortune. Then I remembered I was a bit far down the road of life for that change of tact, having married a woman, and I decided I would diminish and remain Galadriel in the West. But the weirdness is worth it. Swedish massage is a very fascinating practice based on Western medical understanding of human physiology. You'll learn words like desquamation and lymphatic. There are perks, like ladies paying you to touch their body. There is admittedly a slightly pervy pleasure when you're massaging someone really attractive, but it's seldom and balanced by your professionalism, and the amount of slightly tubby men one deals with. And as a guy, I have a disproportionately high level of men, because women therapists won't see guys. It is great though, because men have more muscle, and that's the fun part for me. Getting deep into a thigh or shoulder and working the bits loose. It's truly the best job ever, though I often come home smelling like people. The absolute worst was a guy started touching himself while I was working on him. I have had one other guy proposition me, and one lady that was such a jerk that I ended the session because of what a jerk she was. I've been a therapist 5 years, and these are the only really awful things that have happened. Daily I help people. Daily I make people feel better. I'm sure that's the majority of the job. Of course, there's going to be a couple of weird stories, given the field, but I'd like to think for the most part, they get to do their job the way they want to do it. I'm just going to say prolapsed uterus and they could have warned me, and leave it right there for you to imagine the gaps. I had to suffer this image being put into my head, so now you guys do too. I just graduated in April and I've seen some things. There was a guy that would come to the campus clinic to get a massage from the students. Well, one day his cyst popped. Warm pus flew 3 feet and hit the curtain. Smelled like death. Oh, and then there was the job interview where it was made clear that their distinguished clients would pay for a little extra. How about a big bowl of nope? I'm a massage therapist, doing medical type work. My clients are all super nice, so not many awkward experiences, but I'll share 2. The first one, I came back to change the sheets after one client had gotten dressed and left, and found that she'd had some diarrhea on my table. Luckily, our laundry service treats all of our linens as biohazards anyway, but yuck. And second, I came into the room after washing my hands and letting my client get undressed, and she realized she hadn't been specific enough about how she'd injured her back. So she got up, stark naked, and proceeded to demonstrate the motion she'd been doing when she hurt herself. I wasn't disgusted, bodies don't scare me, but I definitely felt awkward. That's about it. I love my job. I definitely suggest going into massage therapy if you're compassionate and can handle a good amount of physically demanding work. If you're worried about sexual come-ons, stick to medical settings. If you're worried about bodily fluids and/or smells, go the spa route. My brother is a massage therapist for a side income and has tons of horror stories. One of the strangest ones is a man came into their studio, he shared one with others, and specifically asks for a man. Well, he's left in the room with the typical instructions, undress and get under the sheet. And when my brother comes in, the guy is sitting on a couch, cross-legged, naked as the day he was born. Anyway, weirds out my brother, who apologizes and asks him again to get under the sheet and leaves for about 5 minutes. He comes back and begins the massage. Apparently, this guy had a huge penis tattooed on his back and kept hinting for more. The guy even started slightly pulling the sheet off his butt with his hands and saying things like, "It's just the two of us in here. What happens here stays here. I wouldn't say anything." Basically, all of this unnerved my brother a good bit, who was all too happy when the guy's time was up. But, like a champ, he continued to do massages, although they did add that guy to their watch list. I can only imagine all the stories behind the people on that watch list. I worked as a receptionist for a massage service facility. Every masseuse was licensed and the business was legit. But I guess having an all-Asian staff gave creepers the idea that we provide extra services. One day, a rather large white man requested one of our longest massages, 2-hour Swedish massage. I instructed him to disrobe and lie beneath the bedsheets while his massage therapist prepared for the massage. Hand-wrist stretching, hydrating, that kind of thing. Typical procedure. He seemed like a decent guy, so I wasn't expecting any trouble until the masseuse that had just entered the service room stumbled out backwards shouting profanities and slamming the door. Apparently, he was sitting stark naked at the edge of the bed with his wang out, upright, and at full attention. To make it worse, according to the masseuse, when she walked in and gave him a startled look, he gave her the creepiest smile and jumped off the bed as if to approach her. We threatened to call the police and he left, though he had already paid for his service, so too bad for him. I've been doing massage for 10 years, have worked on several military bases, Sedona and Lachlan. You see some strange tattoos, some really interesting scars, some insane back hair, and smell some pretty nasty feet. If you like helping people and aren't into it for the money, especially in this economy, then it's definitely worth it. That's probably your general experience as a massage therapist. Not a whole lot of creepy stuff necessarily, just some kind of gross stuff. I'm a beauty therapist and do massage too. I once had a girl roughly the same age as me in her 20s come in for a body massage as a present from her boyfriend. Whilst doing the massage, I could see the oil looked weird, like a streaky brownish color. And it smelt weird. Well, the client smelt weird. After the massage, we chatted for a bit and she mentioned she'd spent the morning fake tanning herself. I looked at my hands and they looked like I'd just dipped them in chocolate. So brown. I then had to explain to her that it wasn't the best idea to do that as she'd now be one streaky mess. Tan fail. I know some girls have had creepy guys in for massages in the past, but luckily I haven't. Nothing exciting to tell, I'm afraid. Although, one girl had a guy in for a massage, and when she told him the massage was over, he offered her a 21st special extras. She ran off crying. I was still in school and I was giving this guy a massage. Towards the end, he started shifting around a little and acting a bit awkward. I didn't think much of it and just went about finishing up. He'd said it was his first massage. As he exited the room, he got all shifty-eyed and awkward, and seemed a little embarrassed. He didn't want to talk to me. He just paid as quickly as he could and got out of there. I went back to change the sheets, and there was a nice little present sitting under the top sheet. A shining little glob. I didn't know what it was, though I had an idea, so I leaned in to sniff it just to be sure. Yep, it's what I thought it was. The worst part? He didn't even tip. He just left something from his tip. That jerk. Why on earth would you smell it? I had a woman that had explosive diarrhea during the treatment. I didn't know what to do, so I just ran out of the room. That's probably the best thing you could have done. Female therapist here, and surprisingly, nothing too creepy or weird so far. I had this one client while still in school who really wanted extra focus work on his toes of all things. After spending my time on his toes, he wanted glute work. He pulled his tight shorty shorts down and bared his hairy bum. Not exactly what I was expecting, being so innocent and new to the field. Needless to say, I pulled his britches right back up. Since then, I've had a few clients make sexual references or try to give me hugs afterwards. No blatant,
"Here's my penis, you know what to do with it."
There have been a lot of boners though. Every day, all day. All I see is a clock and boners. Alas, I do love my job. It's easy, but hard work at the same time. Very rewarding. I think it depends on where you work, what area of town, and who you're employed by. But I personally love what I do. Yeah, at the end of the day, if this is the field you're looking to get into, just be careful where you work and who you work with more than anything else, assuming you're trying to avoid these situations. A client came in unable to fully stand upright due to low back pain. I told her that I would likely need to work in the hip area, so she should probably remove her underwear. She then said, "Oh, well, I had an accident earlier today and I threw away my panties so I would be more comfortable leaving my pants on." I did the massage anyway, although my coworkers were telling me to refuse to do it. But I felt like if you've already pooped your pants that day, you'd probably feel even worse if someone refused to touch you because of it. However, at the time, I was assuming that she'd actually cleaned herself post-liquid poop. I massaged her back and did compressions on her glutes and hamstrings with her pants on, all while the smell of excrement wafted in my face. Then I noticed at the end of the massage that she had brown stains along the cuff of her pants. She gave me a nice tip, but I had to thoroughly bleach the entire room and sanitize everything after she left. But nothing can sanitize my brain. Physical therapist here, but we do massages a lot. Here's a few quick ones. A girl on her period without a tampon or pad who stunk like heck from body odor messed up the towel we put out for the patients. Next, a woman in her late 40s. I sent her into the room and said that I would follow after taking a short break to get something to drink. Upon entering the room, I found her completely naked doing the sexy look. I turned around and left. In a clinic for chronic pain therapy, a woman accused me of sexual abuse because I didn't want to give her a happy ending. Luckily, she confessed to the psychologist that she made it up. A patient with a polytrauma and a fixature extern fled naked out of the 3rd floor. We didn't know how to manage this, or even why he was running. And many more stories I just can't remember right now or would take too long to explain. But even those bad stories can't take down the positive effects of the job. Grateful people everywhere. My sister is a massage therapist, and one day while working at a very nice upscale spa, she noticed that the guy she was working on would not stay still. He kept wriggling around on the table and she kept having to ask him if he was okay and comfortable. He said he was fine and she would continue, only to have it go on. Finally, the massage is over and she leaves the room to let him get dressed. She waits a few minutes, then knocks on the door to see if he wants water or if he's ready to go pay. He tells her he's done and to come on in, and she walks into him touching himself on her massage table. Apparently, he'd been grinding on the table / trying to get some friction / touch himself, or who knows, while she was working on him. She had taken a break from massage for a while, but she's now back working at the same place, and she's already had people ask her for a happy ending. Needless to say, she's not really crazy about the profession anymore. That's just it. I hate to say it, but at the end of the day, this kind of thing is gonna happen because there are creeps. If it's not something you can handle, then I don't blame you. Massage therapist here. There are some pretty unfortunate clients. Ones that smell, ones that are really fat, ones that are really skinny. Massaging bone is harder than massaging fat. Awkward ones, really hairy ones, horny ones who leave stains on the sheets. But my most off-putting types of clients are the ones, usually older, with lots of dead skin, that once you start to massage them and do the motions with your hands, their skin combined with the oil or cream makes for a disgusting mixture that sticks to your hands and onto their skin, and you're just smearing it everywhere and trying to fling it aside so you can get through the rest of the hour. That's the worst for me. This wasn't even something I had considered until this point, but Ugh. Male massage therapist here. Back when I was in school, I was doing a clinic at the school. It was a pretty chill scene. A lot of us developed regulars and got into a routine. My nights were Tuesday nights, and one day I came in and noticed I had a whole list of my regulars in, including this older man that had been coming to the school for years and getting massages. Every week since starting, he would request me. Now, the school says they can't always get you the massage therapist you want, but they'll try. Every week, like clockwork, he would be my last client. At first, he was nice and social. Then, over the weeks, his questions got extremely personal, and despite my trying to avoid personal questions, he would keep asking. As well, over time, every time I would get him to turn over, he would be packing a major rager. This was usually the point where questions got more personal. One night, I finally had enough, as he began asking if I would ever give a special ending for a large tip. I calmly declined and approached one of my instructors the next day. She just nodded her head and offered to change my night I worked. Kinda feel like it needs to be a little more addressed than that, but hey, at least she got you out of there. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description as well. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.